It's theologically important. There's a huge pastoral difference. I know priests are telling me that they're having people come to them in confession and saying, I've had this experience. What do I do with it? Does this destroy my faith? I know one priest who his faith was almost destroyed by experiences he had until he read my book, praise God. And it helped him to answer questions and say, no, if this stuff is real, they're God's creatures. We can handle it. And so at the pastoral level, the church really needs to start. If nothing else, I would love to see it in every parish. The pastor be able to say, we understand that people have these kind of experiences. If you do, please come to me to talk. And maybe even set up groups where they could talk with each other. Because they're so stigmatized, if they even mention it, in our culture, that the one place they should be able to come is to the church.
Welcome to the Conor Gallagher Show. We explore topics of substance, from raising kids to spiritual warfare. This isn't just a show, at least for me. It's an ongoing journey of our second conversion. Life is short and eternity is really, really long, and there's no time to waste on trivialities. Let's dive into the essence of what truly matters, and let's do so right now. So, all right, Paul, my good friend, it's so nice to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure, Conor. It's like homecoming.
I'd rather be at your house in Georgia again, sitting in your sauna, talking about this, the sacred sauna. You have your guests there, and you have it's got to be the most sacred sauna in the world. You're sitting there sweating and talking about Jesus and redemption, and it's amazing.
Got rosaries in there.
Yes, there is. Yeah, you hung them up. I know. But I have to ask, just before we get into all of these incredible questions, and some of it is going to be a recap of what we talked about a couple years ago. I guess it was a couple years ago. And for the listeners out there, we're going to put a link in the show notes, whether it's Spotify or YouTube or anywhere. We're going to put links to the previous 2.5 hour conversation where we really dove all the way through your book, kind of went through the history, kind of went through many of the different theological questions. We're going to hit some of that. But I got to start, given the time that we're in right now, January 2025, Trump just getting sworn in just a few days ago from the time we're recording this. But Paul, what are the drones? What's going on out there? You're one of the more educated people on all aspects of this stuff. At least you stay very plugged in. But Paul, what's going on? What are these drones?
Well, I wish I could say for sure, but I can, tell you some data and then my speculations based on that. One is that what's being seen is not just things that you would refer to as drones that look mechanical.
Yeah, I hate the word drone because that makes you think of this little thing that, teenagers can fly around the park.
Yeah, and some of these are the size of minivans and school buses and hovering over people's houses. It's not anything like the little commercial stuff you could buy.
And doesn't drone imply that there's not a driver?
Yeah, that they're
a pilot.
Yeah, right.
Do we even know that?
Somewhere else.
We don't even know that.
We don't.
So why are we saying drone?
Well, it's the equivalent of years ago when anything that was anomalous was called swamp gas or Venus or something like that. It's a way of kind of deflecting it away from the anomalous toward, well, if we know a little more, we'll be able to figure it all out. But I would say, so you've got that happening, things that look like mechanical drones, but some of them are doing things that, very unusual. It's very clear from the reports of local law enforcement officials and others that, and even from the DOD, that they can't track where they're coming from or where they're going, that their tracking equipment is not working, that they can appear and disappear, that they sometimes, one police officer with a team in New Jersey talked about sending up their own drone to try to look at it, and it was disabled when it went up toward the thing. So all kinds of things that don't quite fit. And though some of them do fit the FAA regulations for lights and stuff, some of them don't at all. The second thing is that,
by the way, I was hanging out with an American airline pilot just recently, and he pulled out his app. This was just a couple weeks ago. And he pulled out his app and he showed me an app that pilots have that show the blackout areas around the country. And you can see the map showing that no fly zones. Like that's what the app's doing. And he showed me, Connor, it has never been this prevalent. The no fly zones are everywhere. They're everywhere all around these big cities. And he says, there's always some, but this is 10 times what it has ever been before. And his only speculation is because of drones. So the FAA is making no-fly zones because of these darn things.
And they're still showing up.
And they're still showing up.
So you got those things. So then the second kind of bit of data is that, but you're also having orbs show up, glowing orbs at night. And that's
and people, the news and the commentators, we're confusing these two. We're just...
Yeah, they lump it all together as drones, but those are showing up. And those don't act like or look like drones at all. You know, balls of light, sometimes maybe looking a little bit like plasma, just described as plasma, the way the light.
Shape-shifting?
Well, that's the next thing. And then the third bit of data is that so many people, in fact, I think I just saw a piece recently that maybe it was a local mayor or something in New Jersey who testified to this, that as they watch, they see the orb transform into a drone, looking like the other things. And I actually know someone personally out in East Washington State that had that experience. Saw a drone out there. I mean, saw the orb. And while I was watching it, it changed into something that looked more like a drone. But even then it was teardrop shaped and metallic colored with flashing lights. And so all those things together, what the speculations are. Some of it probably is that some people are sending up their own drones to kind of add to the confusion. I think what's happening is that we're getting the orbs, which are genuinely unidentified anomalous phenomena, and then government officials are sending up our drones, trying to track them, try to come after them. They're not doing too well, and then along with that, though, you've got these things that transform from orb to drone-looking things. So I think you've got a mix of things, probably.
Did you hear about the report from the guy who blew his car up outside the Trump Tower?
Yeah, I mean that whole situation is hard to interpret. Probably, almost certainly PTSD, and don't know what his mental condition was.
What's that? PTSD.
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 Yeah, PTSD. Right. Yeah. So, could some of them be our adversaries? If so, that's a scary situation.
I think there's been some congressional hearings or statements saying we are 10 years behind China technologically.
They're still doing crazy things, number one. Number two, they have been appearing not just the last few months. We had out in the Midwest, Colorado, Nebraska, some other areas had a whole flap out there. We had Langley back earlier before all of this that happened some months ago in Virginia, where they actually sent the jet planes away to get them away from what was going on. And then they're all over the country too. So, and they're in other countries. That's the other thing. There are reports coming in certainly from our bases in England and Germany, but also reports coming from China, Latin America, other places in the Far East. So all that to say, it's hard to say, to try to explain it all as one phenomenon. But I think there's at least one element that's genuinely unidentified anomalous phenomenon, the orbs. And maybe some of the drone-looking things that are shape-shifting that way.
All right, so when you go back into the 40s, pilots, very reputable pilots, have lots of testimony, and I've seen their testimony. I mean, even was it Chuck Yeager, one of the early, Right Stuff guys, talked about his experience. It might not have been Chuck Yeager. I'm trying to remember, but it's one of those main guys. Talked about their experience seeing these phenomenons outside their planes. This is just when they're flying around here. But one of the common things is that they just take off like bullets. They're gone. And that's one of the common things they're talking about with these, quote, drones and orbs is the ability, the propulsion to just, gone. And no one can. And if that was happening in the 40s, then and it was like that. There was testimony out there, and their testimony is the same as we hear today. How could that have been China?
Exactly. Yeah. You get this so-called tic-tac phenomenon where it looks like a lozenge. That kind of thing has been reported for decades and decades.
And I think everybody's seen the tic-tac video now from the USS Nimitz. And that was heavily discussed in that big congressional hearing where 3 people came forward. I mean, one of them, I guess, or maybe 2 is a whistleblower, but one of them was that Top Gun pilot, I forget his name, who was involved in that incident. He's as decorated as they come. What's his name? You know who I'm talking about.
Well, you had Ryan Graves, and then you had Commander Fravor. Yeah.
Fravor?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He's the gentleman with the glasses. He was the Top Gun pilot, right? And these guys testified before Congress for like 3 hours. And a lot of stuff came out of that. I remember you and I talked the day or two after this big congressional hearing. But that was the famous tic-tac incident, the USS Nimitz. What do you think about, these people's credibility? And how do you vet, just as a common sense guy, somebody who's well-educated, who's researched this stuff, who's a theologian? I know they're not talking theology, but how do you listen to those congressional hearings or other things and say, I personally find them kind of credible or not?
Good question. First, you just look at the credentials that would count. What kind of experience do they have? In the case of someone like David Grush, what kind of security clearances have they had that show that the government itself put all kinds of confidence in them, gave them clearances and positions in the government that they wouldn't give to someone who was crazy or. So you look at that, and you can check out, and other people will check out the backgrounds of these people. They'll go through the records and say, okay, do we actually have a record that they were employed by that group at that time, that kind of thing. And then, in the cases of some where they didn't come forward until some situation really kind of compelled them to, it's clear that they're not somebody just trying to seek attention, publicity. I think some of them I've gotten to know personally, and my personal integrity meter is going the whole time, and I'm convinced that they're credible and that they're telling the truth.
How would you have met people like this?
I was invited to speak at the first annual symposium of a group called the Soul Foundation. It's a group of academic scholars and also folks connected in every field, science and humanities. And also folks have been connected with Department of Defense, intelligence community, journalists, and others who are trying to do some kind of deep or high-level research into this from all kinds of angles. And when I went there were about 300 people there, which included most of the folks that, if you follow the subject, were there. And I made it a point of meeting them and talking to them. They responded to my talk, which was basically my chance to give a Catholic view of the cosmos and what it might mean from the Catholic perspective, whether our faith could accommodate the discovery of some kind of non-human intelligence that's not angels. So that's how I got to know them. And then I've had conversations with them later, a number of them, and ongoing correspondence. So, in all those ways, I found them credible. It's the kind of thing where when someone says something that's very unusual, your standard's a little higher for credibility. If someone just said, well, I saw a dog cross the street, no big deal. But if someone says, yeah, I saw a UFO, or I saw something, I saw biologics, I saw bodies connected to a UFO, that kind of thing, then of course you're going to be more circumspect. And there are plenty of, the other thing is that this field has plenty of people who are hoaxers and counterfeits and people who are not mentally well. But there is a number of people who are and have been in great positions of trust and influence, who are extremely brilliant, who have all the kinds of credentials you'd look for in anyone you're trying to get a story from. The other thing is that the ones, especially the one before Congress, who actually took an oath, knowing that they did that, knowing that if they did not tell the truth, that they could be prosecuted for that.
Hey, thanks guys for checking out the Conor Gallagher Show. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, or comment, or whatever you got to do to support it. And I appreciate that very much.
Hey, Conor, I've actually got, you're talking about 1940s. We've got the Foo Fighters, and I've got some photos of that here. I can throw up on the screen real quick.
40s?
Yeah.
Let's check it out.
So,
Since we mentioned the Foo Fighters, I want to ask you about that testimony more. Look at those orbs from the 40s. 1945.
Interesting thing about this is that both the Allies and the Axis
They both saw it.
saw them and thought they were advanced technology of the other side.
Look at that. Yeah. I mean, this is stuff from the 40s. And again, it's not, for me, Paul, it's not like, well, that's true. It's that the same old story has been happening since the 40s. How long is that? It was like, what was that? 60 plus 20, 80 years? That's a long time, you know? And what did those pilots that have gone on the record, on video, as old men, I saw them talk, as old men, that pattern that you were just showing, Kevin, just where you got like the 3 dots out there, people's cell phones are still capturing. Look, there's that little pattern. And like, whenever you see it, you wonder, is it 3 crafts or is it one in a triangle shape? Well, there's 4 there. So I'm never quite sure, today they'd call that a drone. That's what they would call it today. It doesn't make sense to me, And so, but it seems like there is very often like a pattern, many, many, many of these cell phone pictures and everyone else's pictures shows almost like a triangle shape. And is it that they're flying in formation, or is it a big craft with lights at the edges of it? What do you think about that?
I think it's probably both. I mean, because some of them you'll see them like a triangle, but then they'll move around, and they're obviously not fixed points with regard to each other. And then others seem to move together as groups. So, but yeah, I mean, even, the documents we've gotten from the government that they have released talk about that they have actually identified the most common shapes, and they redacted a lot of that before they released it.
Really?
But even the government researchers themselves have admitted that there are certain shapes that show up again and again. There are patterns here.
We could talk about sightings all day, but one of them was, I think, in New Mexico or something, and it came right over a mountain and just hovered there. Maybe it was Phoenix. It was a Phoenix. And it just, a massive, massive object. It appeared either it was multiple objects forming a triangle or it was one big one. And it stayed there for like 45 minutes or an hour. Thousands of people standing outside looking up at this thing. Kevin, you know which one I'm talking about?
The Phoenix Lights.
The Phoenix Lights, yeah.
Yeah, Phoenix Lights. I'm going to get that up.
So, I mean, that's another amazing thing. My point is that it's very similar to what these guys are seeing, the Foo Fighters. By the way, Foo Fighters is one of my favorite bands, and I always wonder where they get that. But look, yeah, here it is. That's that mountain I was talking about. Just many, many different. Here we go. Yeah, that shape thing. It's like almost like a boomerang shape.
Like a flying V.
Yeah, flying V, a flying V. Yeah, thanks. And so the amount of people that saw that, it's like tens of thousands. It's not hundreds.
Saw it come over their heads too. It's not just in the distance. They saw it, moving, and it's the governor at the time, won't call his name, but held a press conference to talk about it, and unfortunately made fun of it. He had somebody come out in a little green man.
I remember.
But the interesting thing is that years later, in another interview, he admitted, he said, I was wrong to do that. And in fact, I saw it myself. He admitted later that he saw it himself.
Yeah.
And knew that it was something anomalous.
And you can't say that was meteor because it stayed there for an hour, or however long it was. So that's a big one. That's kind of a big one.
Well, especially in terms of how many people saw it. And that it's in recent times. It's not just some legend or something. And that many people saw it at once. But you have others, South Africa, Australia.
I got a lot of them. That we'll get to. So I'm going to ask about specifics. But you mentioned a very specific word I wanted to ask about, the biologics term, right? So in that congressional hearing, this guy dropped a word that I don't think anybody was expecting. What was that guy's name? The one in the middle. the guy who said Biologics.
Well, I was thinking that was David Grush.
Okay, David Grush, the guy sitting in the middle.
Non-human biologics.
Non-human biologics. I never heard the word biologic. What do you think it means?
I think it has a particular term in biology, but when he was asked to clarify by the congresswoman, he was talking about bodies, but it could have also been, remnants of bodies.
Well, I was thinking like DNA or something.
Could be that.
Why would you say biologics versus bodies?
Because I think it was more is bodies plus other things. Maybe, if it was a crashed vehicle, maybe parts of something. They were definitely biological.
So if you go to a crime scene and you have biologics, you have like a body, but then you might have like saliva,
blood,
might blood, hair.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is that biologics? I guess. So they're just.
I think anything was biological. There are even theories that the things that people keep saying called the grays that look humanoid, but obviously not human because of typically the lack of emotion, that kind of thing, that they may be biologically engineered creatures who have been engineered by, a living thing, but biological materials are used to make them. So maybe he could have included something like that. I don't know.
Why would you trust a whistleblower?
Well, for one thing, when the whistleblower is someone who's putting his career on the line, for someone who has had retaliation by the government against him for doing it, threats, and not just Crush, but others, and is obviously not attention seeking. Like when Grush, he did a series of interviews and then he's been out of the limelight. Dave has. You'd have to, not to be telling the truth. What would be the point of that? Losing your career over it, using your, in some cases, security clearance, having people think you're crazy, having the press try to dig up dirt on you to try to discredit you at the suggestion of government officials, who are behind it. I can't. And I know David personally, and I know Ryan Graves, and they're solid. They're just solid people. They just want the truth to be known.
Are they breaking the law by talking about these things?
Well, that's the thing. Whistleblowers that term's usually used for people who are breaking some kind of agreement or law that could be legally liable to some kind of action, but who get protection, legal protection for that. And these guys, we're calling them whistleblowers, but most of the ones out there, like Rush and others, what they have said, what they've written, the case of Lou Elizondo's book, has gone through.
Say that name again, Elizondo.
Lou Elizondo.
Mm-hmm. Elizondo.
Mm-hmm.
Lou Elizondo.
Yeah.
Most people would recognize his face.
Here he is, Conor.
Yeah, he's all over.
10-second video about how can you trust the government?
Good.
So this is Nancy Mace, Paul, who you were saying, Nancy Mace, and let me turn the.
And that's Michael Schellenberger there.
Mm-hmm.
Has the government conducted secret UAP crash retrieval programs? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Were they designed to identify and reverse engineer alien craft? Yes or no?
Yes.
In your book, you mentioned government employees who've been injured by UAPs placed on leave and receiving government compensation for their injuries. Is that correct?
That is correct.
How can the government deny we have recovered craft if they're paying people because they've been injured by recovered craft?
Ma'am, that's a great question. That's why I think we're here again.
I really believe.
Wow. You know him?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Good man. Solid. Yeah. Some of the things in his book, there might, and by his own admission, or just his own opinion, that kind of thing. So
speculation, you mean?
Yeah. Or maybe things that he's heard. But so with any of them, it's not a matter of whether we would all agree on everything related to this topic. But I believe he's a man of integrity and a man of his word. And he especially knowingly put his everything on the line in order.
What was the government agency he was responsible for? Do you remember the name of that?
It had several names.
Yeah.
ATIP and I can't remember all of them. They kept changing the name, but it was at one time the secret government agency, while the government was denying that they had any interest in it. All the while they had a very well-funded program looking at things and had for decades. And the particular version of it that he was with, he began to be very disillusioned with how they were handling the information and the people they're keeping it from. One of the big problems has been that black programs, which are in Congress, programs that are funded but without they're secret programs, basically. There's still certain members of Congress that are supposed to be informed about this so that Congress can have some kind of accountability, hold them accountable.
Yeah.
And part of the concern of several of the folks who have come out is that that's not the case, and that things are being done, money's being spent, especially in the Department of Defense. And the Defense Department has never ever made one of its audits, come out clean on it.
Yeah.
There are billions of dollars that are accounted for.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to, you said you went to this conference and you spoke. You were sort of the Catholic scholarship representative of that. And I think that's partly due to the book that you did for us, The Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Catholic Faith. That serves as a good segue to kind of get back to why you wrote this book. What kind of qualifies you to, I mean, I know you're qualified to talk about this subject, but start talking to us a little bit about your theological studies, your background, your scholarship. What number book are you on? 50 something?
60. I've published 60. A number of them with 10.
60. Yeah. So, what prompted you to do this after you did all these other theological works?
Well, it is a theological work. For people hear it's about ETI, extraterrestrial intelligence, and think, well, that's science or that's science fiction or whatever. Why? And what it is, it's extraterrestrial intelligence and the Catholic faith. Are we alone in the universe with God and the angels? It's a subject I've had since childhood. Had a couple of experiences that kind of gave me an interest in it.
Can you tell us what those are?
Well, one of them was a sighting one night I grew up in Savannah. I was at Tybee Island, out on the beach at night, and two large, I wouldn't say spherical, circular things appeared that did look like what we would now call plasma, red, white, and green light all through. It really scared the fool out of me and my buddies.
Did you call them orbs? Not really?
Well, they didn't. Sometimes an orb actually you have a sense that it has a 3D, that it's spherical. This was round, but I wouldn't have described it as spherical. It just looked more like plasma. I don't know how else to describe it.
Like a blob in the sky? Like a blob?
Yeah. But it was self-lit. It was not illuminated. It was illuminating. And then I used to have a dream. I'll go into that, a recurring dream about things that relate to this subject, but I was probably too young to have gotten that anywhere from reading or TV or anything.
So you're at the beach with your buddies and these things pop up, like out of the water? Would they hang out?
We just looked up at the sky. There they were.
And then what happened? Like, how long did you see them?
Well, we ran back to our car.
Really?
Drove back to my home, which was 8 miles away on the next island. And then they disappeared. We could see them all the way. But, if you can see the moon all the way if you're driving 8 miles at night. So can't really say that they weren't following us necessarily, but we could still see them until got to my home and they disappeared.
They kind of freaked you out.
Yeah. I didn't sleep too much that night.
Yeah.
But anyway, once I became a Christian at the age I was raised in a Christian home, lost my faith at 12, came back to faith at the age of 18. And after that experience too, although it wasn't connected really to my conversion, but after I became Christian again, then whenever I would think about this, I'd always think about, okay, how does this fit with my faith? How would my faith make sense of this? How would my faith accommodate even, is there room for it in Christian faith? That subject was just on my mind for a long time. I would do research and keep my notes, and I bought a bunch of books that would help me to know the history of it, because historical theology is what turned out to be my field. And that's theology where you're in order to do theology, to talk about theological issues and analysis and conclusions, you look at the history of the theological conversation in the church to say, okay, what did Augustine say about this? What did the other church fathers say? What did Thomas Aquinas, other people say?
And that's exactly what this book is. I mean, it goes through the entire history, and that's why I told you earlier, it's like a PhD without the dryness. I mean, it is incredibly well researched and documented. This is not a book of opinions at all. This is heavy-duty historical theology research.
Yeah. So the first, say, 2/3 of that is that. And then the second part, I go into, all right, in light of all this, now we're not coming in on the, we're not coming in on the end of the conversation, but we've seen most of the conversation for 2,000 years and even longer. What can we say about this? So it was always an interest of mine, and you probably don't remember this, but what happened was some years ago when I was editorial retreat here with you, well, not here, but at Myrtle Beach, and you and I were walking out of the beach. It was after dark, and there was some kind of, you remember that? And some kind of light was in the sky. It's probably a fallen star or something. And when I saw it, I said, Conor, you're going to think I deserve a tinfoil hat, but I've always wanted to write about extraterrestrial intelligence and the Catholic faith and the Christian faith. And you said, write it, I'll publish it. Yeah. And so that I finally realized here's somebody that would publish it. It's a reputable company that I need to do it. Now, it still took a few years for me to be able to find the time. I had to be toward the end of my career and into my retirement.
Well, the reason I wanted it done is, TAN is a reputable brand, but there can be a tendency, particularly in traditional circles, to reject even the possibility of non-human intelligence, extraterrestrial intelligence. By the way, there's a lot of initials that we use these days. UAP, UFO, NHI, non-human intelligence, ETI. I just can't stand it. But it never sat well with me to say that a Catholic in good standing with the church could not believe, if they wanted to, in some kind of non-human intelligence out there that's not an angel, that's not a human. I mean, I don't see why, as a believing Catholic, I can't believe that in the galaxy next door, there's some kind of intelligent race doing stuff. I just never have seen any of the theological things that we believe as serious Catholics, as Orthodox Catholics, that it prohibited that. But I wanted a real theologian to really, really grapple with this subject. So let me just ask you that. Is it contrary? I know the answer, but I'll let you explain. Is it contrary to Catholic teaching to believe in non-angelic, non-human intelligence?
Definitely not. It's certainly not contrary to defined Catholic teaching, to explicit Catholic teaching. The church has never taken a position on that. And there's a chance that they could someday, so I'll submit to it. I'm a faithful Catholic. But what you have some people who just say out and out, it's contrary to the Catholic faith. And when you start asking them why, then they begin to talk about things that are part of the faith that they draw inferences from. Say, if that's true, then it can't be ET. Excuse me. If that's true, then ETI, extraterrestrial intelligence, can't be. And that's the place where
Mary's the mediatrix of all graces, and there can't be anybody else that would need grace or something
like that. Or
Jesus has two natures, so you can't have redemption for anybody else. There's all these kinds of things.
Or that the church teaches we're the only ones made in the image of God. And so those are the kind of questions I had to address in my book, and I still have to address.
Yeah, and saying we're made in the image and likeness of God doesn't mean no one else is made in the image of God.
They would say that the church says we're the only ones, but it doesn't.
It doesn't say that.
And in fact, it's been a standard of Christian teaching, though, as far as I know, not formally defined by the church, that angels are made in the image of God. So you have church fathers saying that. You have Thomas Aquinas saying that. In fact, he thought that angels are probably, we could say they're even more in the image of God than we are. You have John Paul II giving a series of catechetical lectures on the angels and making that point very emphatically. So at the very least, even if the church hadn't defined it, if you say that's a heretical notion, then you've got a bunch of people to throw in that heresy pile.
So, and there is a sequence I kind of want to go through, but let's just ask this. The number one objection is that it's all demons, Paul. It's all demons. Come on, Paul. It's all demons. What do you say?
Well, my usual response is, tell me how you know that. And that's when you get to understanding, first of all, what the reasons are and why the reasons are faulty. Often it's because either, number one, they've already convinced that for these things to exist, they'd be in the image of God, and therefore, and the church doesn't teach that, and so it has to be something else. It's got to be demons. Another approach is that they think that there's lots of anecdotes of especially claims to alien encounters, that sure seem to fit a demonic profile. And I agree with them on that. There are. But then they jump from that and say, since we've got these things that are demonic or seem to be demonic, it's all demonic. And that's just faulty logic. You can't go from anecdotal evidence to make a general sweeping statement.
So when somebody is talking about an alleged alien abduction or something to that effect, and they say, in the name of Jesus, be gone, and it stops, you say?
I'd say, yeah, that sounds to me like it was a diabolical one.
Yeah.
And some of the other things, so the things that are, where the people suffer terribly, the cases where the beings are saying to them, I like to call them creatures because that reminds us that they're made by God. Or the creatures are saying, all the religions on earth are wrong. We've got a new revelation for you about the truth. That Jesus was an extraterrestrial, that kind of thing. That takes us back to other cases in history of new religious movements where the founder believed that an angel communicated to him that kind of message.
What's interesting is I know that we have both had communication with very respected people in the Catholic marketplace that have taken some issue with this. And literally they will say, come on, we know they're all demons. Come on. Like they'll literally say that and then not engage in the conversation at all. They will not engage in the conversation. They roll their eyes and say, it's all demons. Come on. Don't be silly. Well, the silliness is that you won't talk about it.
Exactly. Yeah, there's one, I'll just use the term influencer priest. I hate the word influencer, but who had made a statement like that in social media that we know it's all demons. If somebody tells you differently, even a Christian, don't pay attention to anything they've said. And I knew the person by correspondence and just, texted or emailed and said, can we talk about this? And the response was adamant. I'm 100% sure of this. It's wrong. Even if a saint said it, they're wrong. And I don't want to talk about it.
But no argument of any kind.
My response was, well, for the sake of your audience at least, seems to me you need to give what your evidence is for this, why you're saying this, because if not, it will appear to be a rash judgment. No response.
Silence.
To that. But I still hold to that kind of judgment, if they're not going to give their reasons, it's going to sure look like a rash judgment.
And if you're not going to give your reasons, then you have them, and you're an influencer, you have a moral duty to be quiet. Like if you're not going to engage in the conversation and be able to talk about this book or talk to you or something, and you're just popping out there on damn social media saying it's all demons, you have a responsibility when you're an influencer to give your rationale. I think that's just irresponsible, in my opinion. But all right, that's the demon stuff, which we're not going to dwell too much on that. Give us some of the evidence, like the evidence is not the right word, but the support from saints, church fathers, doctors of the church, and there's some zingers. So there's some really good ones. So I'll just let you take that.
Sure. Now I need to say that, as I said in the book, when I quote these folks, I'm not saying that proves that these things exist. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that the claim that such an affirmation is heretical, is outside the faith, shows an ignorance of the faith or whatever, that's not true. Because the kind of people who have affirmed a belief or been open to belief in extraterrestrial intelligence as not something, apparently the fact that they would publicly affirm it, is not something that's contrary to the faith. Or if you want to throw all those folks in the heretic box, I mean, it's okay.
Yeah, so Paul Thigpen needs if we need both, Conor and Paul need our tinfoil hats, then we need to put tinfoil hats on some big time canonized saints.
Yeah, and others. So for starters, and keep in mind, I'm not just talking about extraterrestrial intelligence, but non-human intelligence, because there's
all right. Draw the distinction. This is like a lot of listeners just went, what?
Okay, the notion that extraterrestrial means literally from beyond the earth. Non-human intelligence would be open to the possibility that there might even be intelligent life on Earth, as we see showing up in cultural traditions all over the world. And you say, okay, that's just a step too far. But I will say this again before you call me a heretic. Both St. Augustine and St. Jerome. St. Augustine, in my mind, one of the two greatest theologians, the Western tradition, along with Aquinas, and St. Jerome, the father of biblical scholarship. If they didn't know the Christian faith, nobody did. And both of them affirmed a belief in non-human intelligence. They thought that at least some of the mythological creatures that appear in Greek stories, that they actually had some kind of real creatures that existed, that those things were based on. And St. Augustine in the City of God, said that we have so many stories of people encountering these kinds of things that it would be imprudent to dismiss it or to deny it. And then St. Jerome.
Well, say on Augustine, these kinds of things. Can you dial in a little bit on that?
Yeah. So for him, again, Greek mythological figures, that they would get called incubi, succubi,
like the Minotaur or something like that.
More like Satyr and Faun and that kind of thing. So, for instance, I'll give him a clear. I mean, he's kind of generally speaking, but Saint Jerome writes about how Saint Anthony of the Desert went to visit Saint Paul of the Desert, and on the way there, he ran into a centaur, talked with him. And then the centaur left, and then he ran into a satyr, and they actually had a conversation. And
what's a centaur and what's a satyr?
Okay, in Greek mythology, the centaur was half bull and half man, and
like bull from waist down and like human up top.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
That. And then satyr usually was like part goat. I mean, they're portrayed in different ways, and part man. But he runs into when he talks to the second one.
So again, this is Jerome.
Saint Jerome
telling the story that Saint Anthony of the Desert met these two creatures in the desert when he was going to visit Saint Paul of the Desert.
Yes.
All right.
And then it's not just the story though. There's a second part to it.
Keep
so
going.
he records the conversation, and paraphrasing, he says, what are you? And he says, I'm one of those creatures that the Greeks falsely worship. And well, why are you here? Why are you talking to me? And he said, we've heard that the Messiah or the Christ, our Savior, one of those words, has come to mankind, and we want to know about it. And then Anthony begins to weep. And he basically says, you got all these Christians around who don't have the time of day to even think about God or be focused on Christ. Here are these creatures that are not even human, and they're asking about the Christ. It moved him deeply. And then Jerome went on to say, now for those of you, because people might say, well, he's just repeating a story, or he didn't really believe it, he was just repeating what was said. But then Jerome takes care of that point himself. He goes on to say, for those of you who don't believe that such things exist, and then he gives an example of how one of these creatures was caught during a certain time. According to other records, it would have been about the time that Jerome was born, and how it was shown to hundreds of people, and when it died, they preserved the body, and they showed it to the emperor and all these things. So at the very least, again, I'm not saying this proves everything. It shows that the father of biblical scholarship had no reservations at all in affirming.
All right, so let me make sure I understand. So you're saying that Paul Thigpen believes in satyrs?
No, I'm not saying that.
I'm kidding. No, you're saying that Jerome did. That's the point.
And did not see any conflict between that and the Catholic faith that he knew so well. And Augustine did not see.
He didn't abandon his Christian faith when he believed that Anthony ran into this guy in the desert?
Nor did Augustine.
Right.
And if anybody knew the faith, those two did. But it's not just them. We keep going further.
By the way, this is what a historical theologian does. You track it through the ages. And so going to Jerome and Augustine, that's about as strong as a foundation. Now, that's not believing in extraterrestrial intelligence. That's showing the belief in ultra-terrestrial intelligence.
Yes, or more generally stated, that it's quite possible, and they thought real, that angels and humans weren't the only intelligent creatures that God had made.
There could be other intelligent creatures on the earth that are not sons of Adam.
Yep. Yeah. Not related to us.
What was the Augustine thing about we can't cross the ocean?
Yeah.
Walk me through that one.
Okay. There's it used to be it wasn't really legendary when you think about it. It was truth, but seen as legend at the time. A kind of lore that there were men called the Antipodes, which means the feet in the opposite direction, that they were on the opposite side of the earth. So their feet are pointing the opposite direction from our feet, and that they existed, that they were human beings. And which is interesting because that kind of does away with, people claiming that everybody thought the Earth was flat.
No, that was stupid.
Even-
That was a Middle Age mistake, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah,
the ancient
yeah.
world.
I mean, the
knew
ancient
it.
world. Yeah,
The Greeks
They-
proved it.
Yeah, they
They
measured the
measured the
circumference of the
Earth,
Earth very accurately, and so he was presented with that, and he said, no, it can't be. But his reasoning was, he said, because all human beings are descended from Adam. They would have to be descended from Adam if they're men, human beings. And we know that the ocean is impassable. You would have to get through across the ocean to get to the other end.
We know that the ocean is impassable. Augustine really thought, as many people did, you couldn't
that was
cross.
the science of the day.
And so
that you couldn't
that's
pass.
like us getting to Mars. It's them
Exactly.
getting across.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
So he would, two things he didn't know, you couldn't expect him to know. One is that the oceans aren't impassable if you have the right technology. And number two, he didn't know about the land bridge.
So if he
between
thought
Asia-
there could be intelligent creatures on the other side of the ocean, clearly that's not the son of Adam. That's the whole point, right? I mean,
yeah,
so
that if the claim is that they are human beings, well, it can't be because they couldn't have gotten there.
right.
They would
And he
either-
was an amazing theologian. So he obviously sat around with his glass of wine or whatever he did and thought, well, if he's not a son of Adam, what does that do with Jesus' incarnation and redemption? If Jesus died on the cross, did he save, the Antipodes souls as well? Like, they must have talked about this. And
Well,
he
guess
didn't
what?
have
When
a
we
problem.
did discover basically the Antipodes, when Europeans got to the New World, and that was the question that got raised. These people have been separated from us. They've had no chance to hear the gospel. What about salvation for them? And
Really?
that was one of the things. You even had some people trying to claim that the indigenous Americans were not human, and they were something less than human. And so the church
They
had to-
didn't understand the land bridge.
and that's what I said. The whole land bridge thing, of course, was, Augustine was unaware of that. If you'd told him either one, that there was a land bridge that people could walk across, or number two, with the right technology, you can get there, then it would have been a different argument, a different thing.
Oh, have you seen the argument of like during the Ice Age where the ice came really far down and you could basically take your little canoe, the Vikings or whoever,
Along the edge.
along the edge and just hop off and stay on the ocean, stay on the ice for a while and keep going and you just go all the way across, just taking breaks on the ice and maybe hunting seals or something. I don't know. But I mean, it's kind of a fascinating point of like, how did they get there?
Yeah.
Here, I should say.
But that was that whole thing. But the reason it's good you raised it is because some people have misunderstood that event, that situation, that debate, and claimed that he was saying there can't be anything other than humans. That wasn't. He was saying if they're human, they'd have no way to get there. But they have to be descended from Adam if they're human.
What about more about, so take us up, right? So you got Augustine, Jerome. Keep going.
It's important. We have to realize that the church typically will accept the science of the day unless it's clearly contrary to faith, and that doesn't happen too often. And when it does, it's because science is kind of overstepping its bounds. But the science of the day was the cosmology of the ancient Greeks, and that was the most popular was the Earth is the center of the universe, and then the sun goes around it, and the planets all go around it. We're the center, and they didn't have any notion of planets as we know them. Planet in Greek just means wanderer. They thought that the planets were themselves stars because they were lights in the sky, but they wandered. They didn't go according to the path of all the other stars that would go across, and so they had no foundation with that cosmology of even thinking about life on other planets, because for them the planets were stars themselves. They weren't balls of gas or rock like we'd know. Even then, they did have a notion that Plato and Aristotle was open to it, that the planets and the stars had souls, that they were animated, they were alive, intelligent, moving across the sky. So in that sense, they allowed for a certain form of extraterrestrial intelligence. And the thing is that, so for instance, by the time of Aquinas, he was still very bound to the cosmology of Aristotle, as most folks were, but he allowed for that possibility. So in that specific sense, he was allowing for extraterrestrial intelligence.
That the planets or the heavenly bodies would be animated by souls?
Yeah, that we actually, that's what they are. They're
So
not
they're
just
looking up there,
physical
they're seeing
things.
Venus and
Moving. So how does it move? It must be.
so they must think
it's moving on its own.
moving. So it
Yeah.
has some kind of life principle, a force, a soul
Yeah.
that's making it
And
move.
a kind of
Now, would
another
it
Christian.
have been like a dog has
a soul in this, but not a spirit, many
I
image
don't
lights of
think
God?
so. I'd have to clarify that, but they certainly that they were living. But I think the fact that they
Like a
went
plant
on a
is
particular
alive.
plant, but on a particular path and all that they, had intention.
But
of
like he
some
looks at a
kind.
plant, anything that has some kind of life force to it can move usually, right? I mean, rocks don't move, right? So he's seeing the planets move and think that it's somehow alive.
And that they seem to, have paths that seem to be intentional and that kind of thing. But all that to say, so there wasn't room in that cosmology to think about extraterrestrial life in the typical way we do, but there was in that way. And then when you finally get to the place where, Nicholas of Cusa, living in the 1400s, he was a cardinal. He was a papal advisor, papal legate, representative at the ecumenical council of his day. So at the highest levels of the church, highly trusted and respected, he taught very openly. He was breaking from Aristotle's cosmology that there's life out there.
He's got a very
bodies.
strong quote, doesn't he, about
I'd have to look at in my book to quote it word for word, but that he says, well, why wouldn't there just be life out there all over?
Now, was he ever a candidate for canonization? Was he a holy guy, or was he a reckless?
I don't think no, that's the thing. I mean, people would look and say, well, he must have been a maverick. But again, if you're a papal advisor, a papal legate, member, appointed to go to the council, ecumenical council of your day, you're respected at the highest levels of the Vatican. That's at least at that level, people obviously didn't see him as a maverick.
What about the Bishop of Paris? I mean,
Well, that's true. I forgot.
University of
about him.
Paris was like the biggest thing ever. That's where Aquinas was. That's where Bonaventure was.
Yeah. And a few years after Aquinas died, under the influence of Aristotle, who had taught this cosmology and that there could only be one universe, they began to teach that God could not have made other universes. And so Bishop of Paris, Etienne, comes in. He has a list of propositions that he condemns as heretical. And one of them is that God couldn't create other worlds, presumably inhabited. But that God could do that. So what you're doing is you're restricting. You're saying that God's power has a limit. His creativity has a limit. You can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So you have him not necessarily affirming that it is, but just saying it's wrong to say that it can't be, that God couldn't.
And Aquinas never talked about extraterrestrials or anything, but he did have an interesting thing about the natures of Christ. And that's because if you go very far in the theological discussions about, ETs, you do bump into the nature of Christ issue. So give us a little bit on that.
Well, again, he didn't have any kind of science for thinking about inhabited planets. But he did have a lot of interesting questions that he would address. And one of them was, would it have been impossible for God, the Son of God, to unite himself to a second created nature? So for there to be more than one incarnation.
I wonder why he would have done that.
The questions came up among the scholastics, things like that all the time.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Some of them, I think, were questions that he just thought, oh, here's a cool question, and so on. But often he's responding to the kind of things that people are asking. And so what he says is that, there's nothing inherently impossible about that. God
That the second person of the Trinity could have been incarnated multiple times.
Yes. Now, he has in mind human incarnations, in which case he says, but we know from our faith that he didn't, but it's not that impossible for him to have done it. He could have. And that it doesn't change what we know to be true about the Trinity and about the incarnation that we do know about, to see a possibility where he could take on another created nature. So that eventually figures into questions about, well, could the Son of God, even maybe another member of the Trinity, have had an incarnation somewhere else?
All right, that's the medievals. What if you keep going in time?
So you've got, Cusa really, really kind of broke it up, the discussion. You have all kinds of folks that aren't necessarily saints, but theologians of the highest caliber, folks with the founding of Catholic University of America, eventually with highly respected in German circles. But a couple of them that I think just in later times that are important to see. One is Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich. Tan has published some of her books.
Her book's right there next to yours, actually.
Yeah, there you go. And in her visions, she saw life on other planets of different forms. And now, of course, folks will say, well, her writings where there's a claim that her editor may have changed or added or that kind of thing. And that's true. So So you can't prove that that part in there was something that she wrote. But first of all, it's if there was editing done, it probably was done along the lines of, oh, we better tone this down because people could misinterpret it. That's a pretty wild claim to make, and for the editor to have added.
Yeah.
But even beyond that, for 50 years after that, is read and praised by highest caliber theologians all over the world. Her works were, and not one of them said, but this thing about life on other planets is contrary to the faith.
Yeah.
Nobody seemed to object to it or see heresy in that.
Yeah.
The excuse me. Even more interesting to me is Padre Pio. Okay, so he died. I was still alive when I was alive by the time he died. It's from the 60s, so it's not legend or something. We have in a couple of books actually. One written by one of his spiritual sons. If you know the life of Padre Pio, he had certain men that he mentored spiritually that he called his spiritual sons. One of them, a spiritual daughter, same kind of thing, but women, who wrote a conversation in which someone asked him, Father, what about life on other planets? What about aliens? I'm paraphrasing. I've got it in my book, the exact quote. And he wasn't just saying it's possible. He said, a typical PO approach. Are you crazy? What do you mean? You think we're the only ones that give God glory? No, there are others out there that give God glory out there. In fact, they even do a better job than we do because they haven't fallen. That's pretty wild. To me, that's because it's Padre Pio. I mean, if I had been the one asking questions, my next question would have been, Father, is this a conclusion you've come to as a theological opinion, or you're convinced that it's true, or is this something God revealed to you? Because he is known above so many others.
He's a mystic.
A mystic who was that God revealed hidden things to, of all kinds. He could see things happening at a distance. He could see the future. He could read souls. All these things that God was continually revealing to him. That would have been my first question. Is it that kind of thing that you're saying? God has shown you this, or have you just concluded this firmly that it's true? But either way, I've had folks claim, I don't think that really happened. But the books were published by the same, by an apostolate that was part of San Giovanni Rotondo, the ministry where he was, by people who knew him. The first one was just a few years after he died. They would have known, the people who published it would have known if he was not really a spiritual son of Padre Pio. They would have known him, and they published the book believing that what he had in it was true. And that's just one little item in many others. But I don't have any reason. And I have, though I can't get the book itself, it's out of print, and it's so far only in Italian. I did have an Italian translator friend who actually found the book for me in Italy, photocopied the pages where the quote was, so that it's not something that's made up. It's real.
About John Paul II?
Yeah. So, all right, here's one of the things I like to say that I think is important, that there are people claiming that the Catechism teaches, based on certain passages, that there can't be extraterrestrial intelligence, and we're the only ones made in the image of God or whatever. And they'll quote the passages. I read those passages a very different way. And I'm not the only one that does, that is not saying that at all, that's a question that's not even in view in those passages that he's referring to, or a number of people refer to. So I say, okay, who is the one person who would be most likely to have the right interpretation of the Catechism, to know what its intention was, and to be able to say if it was right or wrong? Well, St. John Paul II, of course. He's the one who commissioned it. He's the one who shepherded the thing. He's the one who wrote the introduction. He's the warm, enthusiastic declaration affirming it. So if the Catechism taught that it's contrary to our faith, to the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence be contrary to our faith, then why did this happen? On one occasion, an audience in a public audience in a parish in Rome, he's having questions, and a young girl in the audience asked, Holy Father, what about aliens? Now, if he knew that it was contrary to the faith for them to exist, he would have been morally obligated to say, well, actually, dear, that's contrary to the faith. We know they aren't because it's contrary to the faith. He could have even said, we don't know, but science will tell us. But that's not what he said. He said, always remember, they're God's children too. That's an affirmative to me. it's a soft affirmative, but what it's not is a denial. It's not
a denial.
And he would have been irresponsible if he knew that they can't exist. It's contrary to the faith.
Or he could have said they're all demons.
Yeah, he certainly could have said that too. So you've got that Pope Paul VI recorded conversation where he's open to it and could see how non-human intelligence on other planets could be part of the glory of heaven. And then a whole slew of really well-respected theologians. But these are just the ones that are kind of saints or pope or, doctors of the church, fathers of the church.
All right. So that's really, really good. And in our previous sit down, which again is in the show notes, if you want to dive more into the theological implications, they can go and watch that. But I want to return to getting now to, that was a kind of a quick overview of, the theology of this, how you've traced it through the years, through the centuries, the millennia, and your underlying, your whole point, the summary of your whole point, if I get this right, is that the Catholic Church, the entire history of the Catholic Church and thinkers have been open to the discussion about extraterrestrial intelligence or non-human intelligence. And to simply claim that as a Catholic you cannot believe in these things is just clearly inconsistent with the tradition. Fair enough?
Yes, and that more than open to it, there have been a number of figures that almost no faithful Catholic I know would say they didn't know what they're talking about theologically, have affirmed it.
Right. Okay. Now, let's come back kind of to more the current day, and let's just jump into. We've talked about the perception that these are all demons. Okay, and that's, I think we've handled that. What about whether this activity is psyops, right? Psychological operations. That gets weird. Help us with that, because you have researched this and looked into it.
Yeah, that's the idea that all of these cases are our own government doing things for whatever nefarious purposes they have, because of the things they've done. If they've done it, it's led to all kinds of fear and confusion and injury to people. So the claim has been, one claim is that, and this is the one that it's the hardest for me to understand, that people take seriously, but it's usually among people who are very excited about the end times, apocalyptic speculation. Their entire website's out there, but that they believe that all of this is a false flag operation by the governments of the world, ours and the others, to terrify the populace into thinking there is a threat from extraterrestrials to the earth, and that the only way we can meet the threat is by setting up a one world government to deal with it. And of course, that's a setup for the Antichrist. And so this is the great deception of the end times. And they'll quote passages which have nothing to do with it, like there's signs and wonders in the sky, Jesus had said at the end. And of course, kinds of signs and wonders he's talking about are the things like comets and eclipses and things like that. I think that's pretty clear. That's what it's always meant in scriptural tradition. But
all right, but here's the thing: is like I don't. If the government could pull off a one world government to oppress us, I believe it. Like, I believe they would do it.
Yeah.
I mean, so on that sense, I'm sympathetic, because that's a fear, a legitimate fear, in my opinion, right? But I don't understand how they see these things as a false flag operation. I don't get there.
Well, as far as I can tell, they get there because they already have the presumption that there can't be extraterrestrial intelligence.
Right.
Therefore, it's got to be demonic. Therefore, either the things are real and they're demonic, or the things that aren't demons are still part of a diabolical plot.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing. You have others who, claim, not even on Christian grounds, that these are all things that the government is doing to fool people for whatever reason, and they come up with all kinds of reasons. I would say that, excuse me, it's, if you just, and I would say this to most Christians looking into this, don't just go with a few texts that you might read or podcasts you might listen to. There's so much superficial stuff, so much misinformation out there, that you need to read deeply into this. And once you start familiarizing yourself with all the cases of what has happened, the kind of hard evidence we have, it would be really hard to believe that our government would be capable of the kinds of things that people are encountering and seeing.
All right, what's the Vatican? How's it fit into all this? What's it doing historically? Where has it been? What does it know that it's not sharing? Where are you on all that?
Well, can't know for sure. There is, so David Grush, one of the guys that appeared before Congress, confirmed what had been kind of part of the UFO lore in the community for some years. Because some years ago, let me back up. Some years ago,
Kevin, we've mentioned David Grush many times. You just throw a picture up or something so we can look at it.
I'll get him up.
Okay.
But in an interview, he confirmed the kind of the basics of a story that had been going around the UFO community for decades. Not exactly sure what year it was, but some Italian journalists published what they claimed were documents sent to them anonymously that from the Italian government under Mussolini, showing that there was a crash in Magenta, Italy in 1933, I believe it was.
That's really early.
Yes, it is, even before the Foo Fighters and all that. That he recovered it, that he hid it in a particular mountain where we do know for sure they
That's
had
Grush.
great.
He's the guy in the middle on that.
Yeah, that's right.
In that panel. And by the way, just pause here, Kevin. So you know who these guys are, or explain the other two guys right behind them. These are famous UFO guys for sure.
Yeah, so that's George Knapp, journalist, and Jeremy Corbell, journalist. And I haven't met them. They are two I haven't met directly.
But they've done a lot of documentaries and things. So
and they were the reason they got the special seating there, along with some other folks, like Ross Coulthard, is that they were some of the first to interview David and to help bring the story forward.
Yeah, Kevin, people just see these images a lot more. I think so many people have seen David Grush's face, but they don't have a name to it.
Sure.
Right. So I just want to show that. Yeah. Sorry. So keep going. So we're in 1933, Italy.
Magenta. It's near Milan. It's near Milan.
Italy. Okay.
And that there was a crash that Mussolini obviously had it right away, kind of taken and put into. We do know for sure that in a mountain near there, he had this vast underground kind of
Mussolini
facility. That Mussolini had that done. That he called in the Nazi scientists to help study it. They're allied with them at that time. The Nazis were deeply interested in this stuff, for sure. And he found it. Okay.
Yeah, Conor, this is a document that was released in 2019 from the Italian government archives. You can see the translation underneath.
2019. Wow.
So, according to to these journalists, these documents they said are real, and as you see, by personal order of the Duce, that's Mussolini, absolute silence is ordered on presumed landing on national soil of unknown aircraft, and then more about it. So, where it gets really interesting with the Vatican is that that's not the whole story, because if it were, then people would just go to the mountain and see if they could find the thing. But that in 1944,
so that document was basically an order saying you can't go in there.
Yeah, and there were other documents to go with it that they claim are on the official stationery of the Italian government.
Because an unknown, a craft of unknown origin or whatever it said,
Mm-hmm.
it was there. They're admitting it's there, and so you can't
talk about it.
You can't talk about it.
And at least one of the documents that was presented was investigated by a forensic expert who did say the paper and ink dated back to the 1930s. So at least one of them was.
A lot of folks just kind of discounted, but anyway, the rest of the story, and this is where it gets interesting for the church, is the claim that in 1944, when the Italian government, Mussolini had been executed by his own people, and the Italian government was falling apart, that Pope Pius XII intervened in the situation, reached out through, mediators of some kind to the U.S. government, told them that it was there, and wanted to make them
communicate with the U.S. government.
Mm-hmm. Want to make them aware of it so that they could come get it. Now,
so all right. So they're saying Mussolini's dead. The Pope's
Right.
looking at it and saying, "Crap, Mussolini's dead, and there's a really important thing over there, and somebody's got to. We need an adult to take care of this thing." So he
Exactly.
contacts the United States and says, "You better come get this."
so
Is that the point?
That's the point. I mean, my speculation when you hear that, people say, "Why would he do that?" Well, think about it. Okay.
Who else does he want to have it?
Well, exactly. I mean, okay, the Germans would have loved to have had it, and at that
let's not
point,
give
they
it to
could
the
have still
Germans.
captured it and brought
They've
it.
tried to conquer the world
sent
twice.
it to South
That's
America.
not a
I mean, they
good
were
idea.
working on flying saucers, actually creating their own at that point. Could have spirited it off to South America with many of the guys that went there. The Russians, you sure didn't want them to get it. And they were advancing, further and deeper into Europe. And then I even thought about the fact the mafia could have gotten it and sold it to the highest bidder, which could have been, who knows.
Dang.
So if I were the Pope, I'm just, thinking about it, speculating. If I were the Pope, I would have said, okay, like you said, what's the one, who in the world could take this, could keep it out of the wrong hands, maybe make some good of it, and has the resources to do that. You can't, it could be Switzerland, but they don't have the resources to do it. So the rest of the story is that we did. Military craft sent some kind, large military.
And this is 2 years before Roswell. This is 1945.
Exactly. So
Roswell is
before that.
47.
Yeah. And the crash itself was in 33. So did brought it back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is
Where's that?
in Ohio. It's where we know for sure. They're open about the fact that they study their captured kind of foreign stuff, which is supposed to mean human adversaries, to study and try to reverse engineer things. So they're open about that part, but that would have been the place for it to go. And the claim is that that's also where the craft at Roswell. We can talk about that another time, but all that to say, so that's the story. And in his first public interview, Grush affirmed the basics of that. So a lot of folks are saying, wow, okay, we just thought that was probably kind of a wild story. There's some of the evidence that Kevin mentioned, but it just seems so wild. I asked David myself, I said, okay, when you said this publicly, are you only basing it on the documents that had been shown public before? Because a lot of folks felt like they may have been genuine, but it wasn't enough or something. And he said, no, it's based on other things. I have other intelligence. And so if that's true, what it means is that at the highest level, the Vatican would have known about it and chose to remain silent. And I could understand reasons for that too. I'm not saying it did happen. I can't know for sure, of course, where I am. But someone like Grush is affirmed it.
All right, going further in time, as Kevin just said, it was a few years before Roswell. Everyone knows the name Roswell. What do you think Roswell was?
Tan Books is here to help you become a saint. That's why we do everything we do. We publish thousands of titles, literally, that are specifically written to help you get to heaven. Everything from the lives of the saints to the writings of the saints, the greatest doctors of the church, the great spiritual masters, Alphonsus Liguori, St. Francis de Sales, and so on. So please come to tanbooks.com and find the book that God wants you to have right now so that you can get to heaven and be a saint for eternity.
Oh, it was a crash. It was two crashes.
Come on, it was a weather balloon, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. All you have to do is look at the newspapers of the day. The day after it happened, there's this big story by the newspapers in which the head of the base, they've all said, yes, we've recovered a craft, blah, blah, blah. And then within 24 hours, a retraction. Oh, it wasn't that. It was a weather balloon. And then the man who's in the picture holding the weather balloon, looking like a deer in the headlights, before he dies, he says, I can't hold the truth back anymore. They ordered me to tell a lie about it.
Yeah, that's the famous paper there. Yeah,
that's the one. And then right after that is the other one. So they changed the story, and the thing is, they actually changed the story again later.
There's
and tried
a guy.
to claim it was
That's
something
the
else,
famous image of him holding it.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, I'm going to go to hell for lying."
So he did confess before he died.
There's also this landed on some guy's farm, like his desert farm, right? And I remember I saw a video of the guy where this craft landed. I think he's the one who first found it. Yep. I saw a video of him when he's 70 or 80 years old talking about this, and he's saying, I mean, it's just so believable.
He's not the only one. People have been interviewed from that all talked about and being told by figures that show up at their house, you cannot say anything about this, or we'll come after your family.
That's a common theme.
Kind of it is.
The Men in Black kind of thing, right?
But anyway, so Elizondo, we mentioned before, he's confirmed that. Dave Grush has confirmed that. The people that I believe the most have all confirmed that. I don't have any trouble.
All right, so 1933, 1940 something. When was Roswell? 40 what?
47. And then
So does anybody in their right mind think that we had
some country, and maybe us, we had this incredible technology that was able to perform these things that World War II pilots saw as Foo Fighters, you know, that like today people can say, well, we have that technology now. Who thinks that we had that technology back then? Because either, right, isn't there three options? One, it's non-human technology. Two, they're all lying or crazy, and they're just not credible for whatever reason. Or three, we had that, somebody on this planet, you know, had that technology all the way back in the 30s and 40s. I mean, it's got to be one of those.
And the first one is the only one I find reasonable.
Okay. All right. So Roswell, then let's talk about, like, there's some other kind of fascinating things. Again, we're getting into kind of the credibility of witnesses. One of the, I guess, two of the stories that I find the most fascinating is when there's a group of kids. One was in Zimbabwe, another was in Wales or England. I can't remember, but very, go ahead.
Australia.
Australia. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So credible, because a bunch of kids, a bunch of them, had an amazing experience where they see something, and maybe you can tell the story better than me. But 30 years later, they come back and all testify to the whole thing again. And some of these kids, they filmed these kids, at least the one in Zimbabwe, I think, right after it happened. They tell their story. They come back 30 years later and say, I was telling the truth. And then the teachers and the school administrators are threatened, and they fess up to that years later when they're super old. The men in black showed up and threatened to, you know, destroy us.
Will ruin your reputation.
Talk to us about those, because it's one thing when, like, a pilot sees something. It's another thing when these kids see something, and they didn't just see a light in the sky. They saw
Grass on the ground.
Yeah.
And creatures coming out and communicating with them without words.
ESP, right?
Well, telepathy.
Telepathy.
I guess is what we would say. But so similar kind of thing in both the one in Australia and the one in Zimbabwe. It's just, I don't know, how do you say all these, it's kind of mass hallucination?
Do you think all these kids at like 12 years old or something, or younger? They might have been younger. Oh, here it is, 20 years later.
Yeah, I've got this. First, I think there's like 1 minute of listening to them years later, but I also have the interview with them immediately after it happened. So play this.
And by the way,
first.
interviewed not just by journalists, but by John Mack, a psychiatrist at Harvard. I think at one point was head of the Harvard psychiatry department.
You want to watch a clip, Kevin?
Yep.
All of a sudden, it was just like imaging going through my head of a message, a communication. I describe it as like a telepathic communication. There was no talking.
I remember being very captivated by the eyes, and in that moment, however long it was, because I have no idea of the time frame, it was mesmerizing. It was absolutely
Kevin, was this the Australian?
As soon as I saw it, I
Zimbabwe.
knew that this was something from another planet or something from out of this worldly space.
People need to know there is something else out there.
Now, I've also got this.
We were playing down over there on the log.
Yeah?
And then we saw something shiny, so we all ran down over there.
And it was in the early morning?
It was at break time.
Yeah?
And then we saw something shiny. And we saw two people. They were in tight black suit. And they had big eyes. And we didn't actually see their nose, but it was quite small. And their mouth was quite small as well. One of them was running in slow motion up across the ship. And the other one was standing beside the ship.
Yeah, you made a drawing, huh? It looked like this?
No, yeah, something like that. I couldn't see the eyes or the nose or the mouth. It was just blank, like a piece of paper.
Well, when they came, I thought they were crazy.
Was this the first thing you thought?
I thought they were crazy just coming to our school doing nothing. And all I saw was something like silver coming down, and I said, what must that be? And everybody's crowding it. I must go crowd too. And then I went and I started crowding, and everybody, then more people came and more. And then I said, hey, I can't see anymore. Come on, somebody, I'm short. Come on. And then I went to the front and I started seeing more of them, and then I just ran away.
That's cool. So those were the first clip we saw, just for people especially listening and supposed to watching. First, we saw some of those kids grown up as adults. Mm-hmm. And then the second one was as little kids. And that was a Dr. Mack video, right? So this psychologist mm-hmm. showed up right away, like very shortly after this event happened in Zimbabwe, right?
And it was 62 children and several teachers all experienced the same event.
It's amazing. They're all lying, right? and they all saw demons, right? Walking on a spaceship. Demons appear on spaceships and walk around and communicate telepathically with these kids. What do you do with that?
Well, you have the whole thing with the demons. That's another point we have to make, that demons are, they're spirits. They're angels. They're spirits. That's essentially what they are. They don't have their own bodies. They can appear with bodies, but they don't need craft to fly around in. You have some people who would claim that, it's possible for demons to craft something out of existing matter. They can't create anything. And so they'll give us an example how in some, and I agree with this, in some exorcisms, that the possessed person, when they're being exorcised, will spit out nails. And so those things seem to have been crafted, by the demons of existing material. So yeah, it's possible for them to do that. And so the claim is that everything we've ever seen, lots and lots of cases of physical evidence, like where ground depressions on the ground where the thing landed and burned ground, the bodies, the craft themselves, that this is all crafted by demons in order to deceive us. And which again, it seems to me that's just starting with the presumption it has to be demons. So let's find a way that we can account for the physical stuff. The parallel I think is interesting is that I guess there's still a lot of controversy about evolution and that kind of thing in the age of the Earth. But in the first days when it was coming out, the science claiming how old the Earth had been, and talking about dinosaurs, previous to human existence, and there were dinosaur bones being dug up all over the place, and so the people who tried to claim that the Earth is too young for all that, then they had to somehow account for the physical evidence of dinosaurs. How did they do it? Well, same kind of straw grasping. They said, well, demons can craft material, And so what this is, the demons have crafted dinosaur bones, fake dinosaur bones, planted them in the earth for us to discover in order to deceive us.
So that we think the earth is old.
Right.
Yeah.
Seems to me it's just the same kind of thing all over again. You've already got a presumption, and therefore, if you can just find some possible way in which the physical evidence you can account for it, that's what you do. And to me, just as risible as it is to say that the demons crafted dinosaur bones in order to deceive us, I would say the same thing about saying that a physical craft or bodies, the biologics they've found, that those are just crafted by demons to deceive us. Maybe in some cases, but I just...
All right. What about, so a lot of those children say, and others, that the aliens communicate telepathically. But you and I both know that there's a segment of this community, the UFO community, that do something perhaps extraordinarily dangerous, and they meditate and they try to contact mm-hmm. these people or these things, these entities, I shouldn't say people, these entities telepathically themselves. Walk us through that, because, again, you have a very balanced approach to this, but some of these people, I think you agree, totally cross the line and go into dangerous territory.
Oh, it's extremely dangerous. And even, I know some of the folks in the conversation that aren't necessarily believers who've just said to folks doing that, you don't want to invoke something when you don't know what it is.
Right.
I mean, even if it could even be a hostile alien you're invoking, if that's all you're doing, but it's a very imprudent, very dangerous thing to do. If you don't know for sure what they are, even if you think to invoke them is a very different matter. To try to summon them is the word that gets used. And
one of those big one of the main guys in this whole movement. I forget his name, but he's a doctor.
Gary Nolan?
No. He's a doctor, and he runs a huge.
You're talking about Stephen Greer.
Yeah,
He's here in North Carolina.
Yeah,
yeah.
Stephen Greer
Used to be anyway.
And he seems to have incredible documentation about government projects and like what is alien versus what is man-made. But then he leads these damn seances, and they sit around and invoke aliens somehow. They communicate through seances. I was like, what's he doing, Paul?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
I mean, yeah, I don't think they call it seances, but they call it CE5.
It looks like a seance.
Close Encounter 5. Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it's an extremely dangerous thing to do. And you've got just recently another, person coming out saying that we did something similar, but a different protocol.
Yeah, this is that Barber fella. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So
we can talk about that in a minute, but yeah, to walk us through this meditation. I just want people to hear that you would never endorse something like this.
No, I mean, no. It's if they show up, it's one thing. It's another thing to try to call them down, because even if it were possible to do that, you could get demonic, counterfeits, and that's why.
If you're trying to summon an alien with your mind and soul, that's a big opening for a demon to come right in.
All right, let's take the parallel example. Okay, the scripture makes it very clear, Christian tradition, you don't try to summon departed spirits, human spirits, right? You don't try to channel, we would use the word today, but necromancy, it's called traditionally. Okay, does that mean that departed spirits don't exist? No, of course they are. But what it means is that it is such a dangerous thing that you are likely to get an imposter, counterfeit human spirit. And we do have in our own tradition that human spirits, departed spirits do show up sometimes, usually going through the purgatorial process, asking for prayer, that kind of thing.
We got the book Hungry Souls.
Well, exactly.
It's all about these.
Yeah.
But they came down.
They weren't summoned
on their own. They weren't summoned.
And so I think it's clear the church's tradition is the fact that they come and the real ones exist doesn't just allow you to say, okay, then I'll just ask them to come. It's just much too dangerous because there are demonic deceptions. And again, I agree with, folks who disagree with almost everything else that yes, some of these cases, almost certainly, they fit a diabolical profile. I've written books on spiritual warfare. I'm familiar with the classic diabolical stuff. But you can't jump from those anecdotes to the whole. Just make a blanket statement.
Yeah. I meant to ask you about the Brazil incident because that's a major one. A major one. And I meant to ask about that after the kids because there were, kids involved in that, and the whole town. But tell us a little bit about that.
Excuse me,
Conor. I've got the trailer for that documentary too. It's like 2 minutes long.
I'd watch it.
Captures the whole thing.
I'd watch it. I've watched this documentary and it's good.
Yeah,
it's good.
I met James at the last conference too. Fox, the guy that has produced all those. He's a great guy.
I'll get that.
So you want to watch it before I speak?
Yeah, let's watch it.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of people haven't seen it. So
sorry for the advertising.
This was a shocker.
1996, the people of Varginha, Brazil, witnessed a UFO event that would change their lives forever.
Só que ele planava, ia perdendo lentamente a altitude e ia caminhando.
Call it another Roswell, if you will. That is a crashed vehicle that had beings on board.
Mas que eles não poderiam admitir a verdade. A população ia entrar em colapso.
Nada temos a esconder.
Finally, the facts will be revealed.
The Virginia case is considered the most well-kept secret in the military circles of Brazil.
My objective here is to put some clarity on what took place in Varginha, Brazil, January 1996.
2 seres extraterrestres foram capturados, depois, posteriormente, foram levados para o hospital.
The witnesses are some of the most compelling testimony I've ever heard.
Meu nome é Carlos de Souza.
Meu nome é Cátia Xavier.
Meu nome é Liliane Silva.
Meu nome é Valquíria Silva.
Em 1996, eu vi uma criatura estranha ali.
Action! A lot of people in this town have a little piece of the puzzle.
Naquele local, eu vi o rastro da criatura, o pé.
Foi onde ele falou que eu vi era uma coisa sobrenatural.
This year,
Mark Elixerez, he had captured this creature with his bare hands.
Você confirma que o seu irmão estava de serviço naquele dia 20?
Confirmo.
After he captured the creature, he developed this infection that wouldn't go away.
Foi pro CTI de manhã, 7 horas da manhã, 15 para o meio-dia ele veio a óbito.
This can no longer be covered up.
They might shoot us because we're on the property.
This can't be denied.
Bateram na porta e aí falaram para mim.
Ficar quieto. Se qualquer iria sofrer uma punição muito severa.
This was proof.
We pull this off. It'll be the most compelling testimony revealed.
Of contact.
Aqui, ó. Foi aqui.
This is a level of confirmation that only a handful of people on this planet have.
Yeah, moment of contact. There was a lot of subtitles in there to go along with the language. But, you know, again, an entire town saw this, and then the government shut everything down. Now, again, that was, when was that? In the 80s? You remember, Kevin?
96.
96? So, you know, that was much earlier. So, not that long ago. I feel like I'm showing my age by saying 80s when it was really 90s. But, you know, so many eyewitnesses, people who saw the craft go down, people who claimed to see these little creatures walking around, and then a rather staggering testimony of the military people who allegedly picked up one of these creatures and then is hospitalized and dies the next couple days from severe infection and probably some kind of radiation poisoning or something. I mean, his whole body shut down and he died. And then the government refused to tell the source of the cause. And so, you know, when you see these eyewitnesses who are brought back to the memory and they're talking about it, or they go out to the site where they saw a craft, or you're talking to the then children, now adults, who saw this little guy run through town or something, like, and they're brought to tears. I mean, they're award-winning actors, Paul, if that's what they are. Really good, but it's tons of people. And I think the main story in that is that they recovered bodies and then the government made them disappear. But they interviewed, I think, the radiologist, who did x-rays on this creature, this dead creature at this point. These are doctors who kept silent for all this time and finally came out and talked about it. It's just, if this was all fake, it was a staggeringly well pulled off conspiracy dealing with multiple demographics, people of all different ages, all across this town. It's like the greatest hoax in the history of planet Earth, if it's a hoax.
And then you said they made it disappeared to the United States. That's the testimony. There were American soldiers showed up. Excuse me, took it. American military.
That's right, I forgot
took
that.
it
Yeah.
and took it back to the United States. And that's part where there are all kinds of reports around the world, but the ones that are coming from our allied countries, the governments are very reticent to talk, and I'm sure it's because our government leans on them in that regard. And so, yeah, that's one of the cases that's like if you should watch the whole documentary.
Yeah,
it's that one man when he goes out and shows where the thing was, and he just begins to weep. It was real to him.
He just looked believable to me. Yeah. He just looked, and I could be wrong, but he just looks believable to me. And again, just the mass of people and testimonies from all different. I mean, they all have their story about what happened over those day or two. You know, it's just incredible. Yeah, moment of contact is a great thing to
even
go
have
watch.
Details. I'll mention that where they talk about, the smell of the creature, and that they'll either say like ammonia or sulfur, which is interesting. I know.
I think it was very strong, and it was like smelled the whole hospital up.
And guess what? There are other people encounters in other places claim to have had encounters that testify to the same smell. Yeah. Now, how do you just come up with that? Because it's not generally in the literature that it's like that. But people in different parts of the world in different years seeing things, having those contacts, and then saying, but the thing I remember is the smell, and they describe it the same way.
Yeah, I remember one of the nurses testified that it stank up the whole half of the hospital. Mm-hmm. It was like the whole thing smelled.
Hey, Paul, am I right that sometimes in cases of exorcisms and things that sulfur is common there too? As a smell?
It's certainly in that and in the lore. So, I had to mention that yes, I realized that that that's the case. But that still isn't proof that it's demonic. It's just how it is.
Yeah, I just don't understand why demons would crash flying saucers into the ground and then run through town with little green bodies. I don't know why demons would do that and die and die
and make other people sick and die too.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
and make the person who touched you sick and die.
Yeah, it just doesn't add up for demons. All right, but there's a lot of stuff out there. Let's change on demons again. Skinwalker Ranch, that is that demons?
At least some of it, I'm sure. They have, for those who don't know, it's a ranch out in Utah where paranormal phenomena has been going on for a long, long time, and it has a history that makes me think at least some of it's demonic. And that
is that just like the most cursed, the ranch in history.
Well, part of the history of it is that there were two Native American peoples who were at war, and I think one of them felt betrayed by the other or something. I don't remember all the details, but they claimed that they put a curse on the people. And so that right away, I think, okay, that could certainly be an opening to demonic activity. And some of the things that have happened to the people studying it. It was studied for years by Robert Bigelow, who's a big guy in the aerospace industry, who was contracted with the government to study what was going on there. And they were interested in UFOs and everything else that was going on. There's a lot of things that aren't directly related to UFOs there.
Paranormal, though.
Yeah, right. Paranormal stuff.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, when he sold it to the man who owns it now, refused to give over any of the research results they had.
Can the bishop out there, where's Skinwalker Ranch? Where is
Utah.
That? Can he just fly over in a helicopter and exercise the whole damn thing at one time?
I've often thought, they've had, I haven't watched the shows in a long time. I watched some of the early shows, and they had an group of indigenous people who did a kind of religious chant, that kind of thing. And then they had a rabbi pray, but I'm pretty sure was Kabbalistic. He was of that kind of Gnostic variety of Judaism. And I think I even suggested in a letter, I never got a response back to them, that, well, you ought to consider having an exorcist, a priest who's an exorcist come out there, and that might actually help you sort out some of these things.
That's why I bring this up, is because some of this stuff is demonic and some of it's not. And we have to be smart enough to draw distinctions. Hello, that's what intelligence is drawing distinctions. So Skinwalker Ranch looks like a big haunted house to me.
Sure, seems like that.
And they need to address it. And so the guy who wrote one of our books on spiritual warfare, you've participated. Well, actually, it's a good spot. Tell us about your experience in the exorcism industry, for lack of a better word. Is that right? I don't know what to call it. Ministry. Yes, I repeat that. Exorcism ministry as opposed to industry. That's a better way to say it. But you've gotten to know the whole marketplace. I don't know what else to call it, but the whole, there's a whole movement. There's academic sides to it. There's spiritual sides to it. There's a conference.
There's ecclesiastical side to it, because you have to have a duly appointed exorcist.
Yeah, and so you've gotten involved in that, and you've attended conferences and all these kinds of things. Spoken at these exorcist conferences. So you're a guy who clearly understands the demonic, right?
It's okay. I look at the life of Saint Padre Pio. St. Pio. And first of all, St. Paul tells us that, yes, demons can imitate angels of light. It tells that in Scripture. Does that mean that angels don't exist? No, it means that he is a counterfeit of something that actually does exist.
Right.
And it's to his advantage. It's part of his strategy to counterfeit something that he could use to ensnare people. So when you look at the life of someone like Padre Pio, and he had occasions where demons counterfeited Jesus, Mary, his spiritual director coming up to his door. Does that mean because he and others had experiences like that those things don't exist? Jesus doesn't exist? Say, no. You can't make that conclusion that just because demons will imitate something in order to deceive people that it doesn't exist, that it must be all just demons. And so I would say it makes sense to me. I don't want to try to think like the devil the way C.S. Lewis did in Screwtape Letters, but if I were, thinking, okay, what strategies would I have if there were actual non-human intelligences that aren't angelic visiting us and that kind of thing. And I were looking for a new strategy for the, for the modern age. So yeah, let's counterfeit that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course I'd be right there in the middle of it, but I'd be there as a counterfeit of something that's real. And I think that's what's happening. That also, you talk about the people get interested in this. Okay, my own story. I was atheist for 6 years as a teenager, but I still, had a longing for transcendent things and was trying to find wherever I could something that was beyond pedestrian everyday life, because we're made for God, and you still have that hunger even if you don't believe in Him. And I meet a lot of folks in that situation. They don't believe in God, maybe have rejected it, maybe never did believe in Him, but they still have this transcendent hunger. And this topic is a natural for them because it's something beyond the prosaic, something beyond the everyday, something that seems elevated and mysterious. And so I can see why it attracts a lot of folks like that. So if a lot of those folks have occult backgrounds, a lot of them do that. I understand why they do, but it doesn't mean that what they're attracted to is totally demonic.
Yeah.
I mean, NASA, there's evidence that the people at the beginning of NASA were involved in the occult and that kind of thing. Does that mean we should not have anything to do with NASA or its programs because they were people with occult involved with it? No.
Are you higher on extraterrestrials or ultra-terrestrials?
I think it could well be both. I really think it could be. We haven't even talked about the science of it. And in my book, I just make it clear at the beginning, look, I'm not a scientist. I can't argue the science. There are people who have argued the science, and I'll let, give you some references for that, or I did in the book. But the truth is, all you have to do is look at the history of science. Once again, history helps. The history of science and scientific revolutions. I mean, Thomas Kuhn wrote about that. And so they've come to describe now what they talk about, scientists talk about, or cultural studies talk about Kuhnian revolutions. And that is where science gets to a certain place, thinks it has it figured out in a particular area, and then you start having outlying information that doesn't fit the model. And when enough of that accumulates, then there's a revolution in science. The paradigm changes, and all of a sudden, what once was written off as crazy is now accepted as the norm. And it continues to happen. The biggest one was the Copernican revolution. And that's one reason why I think the church can accommodate, information of this sort. The people make a big deal of the Galileo case, but the truth is that it wasn't just the church, big bad church, persecuting Galileo. The majority of scientists and philosophers, as well as theologians of the day, all rejected him because they followed the Aristotelian model. And so it was more a matter of they're trying to follow the science. And then science finally, the outlying things, Galileo looking at the moons of Jupiter. And by the way, when he found the moons of Jupiter, which were proof for his position, where did he go? As a scientist, he had to get independent verification by other scientists. Where did he go? To Jesuits. Went to the Jesuit astronomers, and they confirmed it for him. So it wasn't just big bad church, against him. But all that to say, I think the Copernican revolution, the church, a lot of people in the church, pressed against the new ideas because it was just the established science of the day. Once science itself corrected itself with Galileo and others, then they said, oh, okay, well, you know what? That wasn't really part of Christianity in the first place. It was just part of actually a pagan way of looking at the cosmos. And so they were able to kind of say, okay, we can make room for this because it's not part of the Christian faith that the earth is at the center of the universe. That's Aristotle. And one of Galileo's defenders, who was I think he was maybe Franciscan, who said, when he talks about these matters, and people say it's contrary to Scripture. It's not contrary to Scripture. It's contrary to Aristotle. Mm-hmm. I think we're in a similar thing now, where we could be. Finally.
Go ahead. So when people are having these experiences, and a lot of them are caught on camera, and I'll call them orbs for lack of a better word, or these little balls of light. What do you think the likelihood is that they're ultra-terrestrial? And it kind of go into that a little bit, where it's something that has been here on Earth. They're not from another planet, another solar system. They're natives here, but they're not of the son of Adam. This is going back to our original conversation that the church followers didn't have a problem with the idea of that. Whether it's true, it's a different story.
Right.
But it's not contra to church teaching. You know, and there's so many eyewitness testimony of these things disappearing into the water. And we know that that we don't know anything about the ocean. I mean,
we know more about the surface of the moon than we do about
it's crazy.
Yeah.
So much witness. And I've heard that some of these drones over New Jersey go and disappear into the water.
And coming out from that direction anyway, yeah.
And they go into the water without ever breaking the surface of the water. Just
look at Skinwalker. I mean, they've got, video. I've seen it of something passing through the ridge and coming out the other side, like passing through the solid mountain and coming out. And that's not the only place that people have seen that kind of thing happen. Just right through trans matter, just right through.
Kevin, pull up the Dome of the Rock. This is so cool just because, I mean, this is not like passing through rock or passing through water, but to me, this shows, Paul, like a technology that we just don't have. And the fact that this thing takes off so quickly. So this is, what's the Dome of the Rock, Paul? It's the it's a
Muslim holy place, yeah.
Muslim
in
holy
Jerusalem,
place in Jerusalem.
On the rock.
Is that able to get bigger, Kev? Okay, so this is the cool video where's the dome, Kevin?
It's underneath.
Okay, so the dome.
So that orb is going to drop down on top of it.
And everybody would recognize the big gold dome. You just have to, we'll show a picture of that later. But so that little ball of light comes down and just stays over the dome, and like there's multiple cameras, multiple people, and then it just takes off like a bullet. Gone. And that's the amazing thing if you watch how fast it takes off. And I have no idea what they're saying because I don't speak that. Whatever that is. Boom. That's it. Boom. Boom. Kevin, show the other video if you can, where everybody can see the actual Dome of the Rock. But just so we can kind of get a close up to it. But is this? Yeah. Okay. So that's a close up of. This is the same event.
That's the orb.
The orb thing. I don't know if that's an orb, plasma, that right there. Everybody knows that. Boom. And it just takes off. So this was in 2011. Tons of people saw. And then there's these little red dots that linger on, other little orby things flickering after this thing happened. Now again, maybe that's military. Maybe that's a military technology. Maybe it's China. I don't know. This is back in 2011. But its acceleration is like a bullet. It's like a bullet, I mean, if there was a human in there, they'd die instantly. You know what I'm saying? So that's 2011. How long ago? That's 13 years ago, 14 years ago. Have we had that bullet-like technology? And and let's talk about that for a second. I mean, it's if the government had technology that it doesn't want to reveal, that would kind of make sense because it would tank the oil industry. The whole energy sector would go kaput if we didn't even need gasoline anymore to make stuff go zoom, right? So if they had some kind of incentive, it's there. Agree with that?
Yeah, of course. That incentive, supposedly not to show their hands to our enemies of what we have, adversaries. But then why would they do something like this?
Yeah.
Why would they do it where people can see it if they're supposed to be hiding it?
So whatever that was, it's going over what's considered a holy site. It didn't come over the South Park Mall down the street from here. Like it went over a holy site. It's making a statement, right? I mean, they want people to see.
Seems to be. Why else? Yeah.
So anyway, so you got objects like that. I'm not saying that's one, but you got objects like that that are disappearing into the water, passing through rock, these kinds of things. Just some kind of technology we can't understand. But again, Galileo would think that we were witches because of our cell phones and talking to each other. I mean, he really would, right? We'd all be burned up if we just showed up, in the Middle Ages and started texting to each other. They'd take us outside and burn us. Are they saying like, how are you making these words appear on this person's screen? So there could just be some kind of technology that we just do not understand. Do you want to bring order and clarity back into your family life? Hey, I got 16 kids and I understand better than anyone. We need to do that. So my wife and I, Ashley, we developed a 6-part family management system to do just that. And it's based on concrete business tools and principles that you can apply in the day-to-day running of your household. So please come to wellorderedfamily.com, check out our tools, our books, and most importantly, our one-on-one coaching so that we can work directly with you and customize a program to help your family get to the next level. But I wanted to kind of get back to the orb phenomenon and we talked a little bit about this before we started. And it's delicate. This is a delicate topic, but there is an orb phenomenon that has been described from multiple Marian apparitions. What do we do with that? So, should we just give examples of that? I don't know how you want it. Kevin, I don't know if you want to say anything there or...
I'll just add, Jason told us while we were at lunch too, he reminded me that St. Vincent Ferrer, there's a story that an orb descended down and guided him on his travels, and his fellow travelers were with him and saw this orange orb kind of leading them on their way. So it's not even just Marian apparitions, but as well other cases from the lives of saints.
Yeah, and let's look at like some of those Marian apparitions, Kevin, that we were talking about earlier. I'm flipping through my notes here.
Well, there's a saint who said that I'm trying to remember which one, was it Chimagogani? I can't remember, that her guardian angel appeared to her as a glowing sphere. As an orb.
A glowing sphere?
Mm-hmm. So I think the one thing we must...
Our Lady of Beno, how do you say it, Beno?
I think Beno, yeah.
Beno, 1933. Paul Tan's had that little children's Windiot
coloring book
forever, 1933. Is this a quote from it, Kevin?
Yeah, that's a quote from that article.
Quote, it was a moonless, frigid evening in the poor town of Beno, Belgium, when Mariette Becco noticed a, quote, bright ball moving slowly across the horizon. She knelt on a wooden bench in the home's parlor and pressed her nose against a frosty window pane as she watched an orb, quote, like the moon, pass through pine trees and move towards the Becco home. Gradually, she saw the image take on the silhouette of an exceedingly beautiful woman, a little over 5 feet in height, who began to hover a few feet above the ground just outside the window. The image looked directly at Marietta. She was smiling. No one else in the home was the wiser as to what was unfolding.
That was the first of 7 or 8 different apparitions of Mary to Mariette.
Approved apparitions.
As I understand
as best as I understand it.
I'd have to check it.
So again, I don't know, but Tan's published that book for a long time, long before I got involved, so we should probably check it. But there's an orb, man. There's an orb. Yeah. And there's others. There's other examples, The Flying Cross in England, Our Lady of Zeton, Egypt in 1968. There's all kind. Again, there's like this orb kind of thing going on. What's up with this, man? What is up with orbs?
It's in the cases that the church has examined that we can have some confidence in. I think we have to assume that it's angelic. Our Lady coming with angels around her, perhaps. We have to keep in mind. You look at Scripture, for instance, when the cherubim and seraphim appear, and they've got these multiple eyes. Why do they look the way they look? There's something that's unusual. Usually there's some kind of symbolic meaning. God, or under God's direction, the angel itself has chosen to give a certain appearance because it would have meaning to the people who are watching. So in the case of Ezekiel's wheel, the apparition, angelic apparition around the apparition of the glory of God, it's not God directly, but the glory of God, is revealed that was the way a royal throne looked in the Middle East at that time.
Here's a vision of the chariot. Is there a particular passage?
I don't know if there's a part you want to zone in on with that.
But yeah, so you got things like that. The others with all the eyes, that's symbolic of the omniscience of God, the all-seeing eyes. So there seems to be that we'll choose something with symbolic meaning. Well, what meaning would an orb have? In ancient philosophy, if you were to ask a philosopher what's the perfect shape, they would tell you a sphere.
Yeah.
And, it's because it's everything, every part of it is equidistant from the center. It's perfectly symmetrical in every way. And so, perhaps it would make sense for an angel to appear as an orb of light, as some of the saints have described it. And
therefore demons, if they were doing stuff, they are angels. Might they kind of appear the same way?
Counterfeit, sure. I think the main thing we want to do is a lot of folks in the UFO community, the way I describe it is they look at Catholic stuff through a UAP, unidentified area phenomena lens. So anything they see in history or Catholic tradition that is anomalous, right away they'll say, "Oh, see, that's a UFO." At Fatima, it's a UFO. These orbs, they're UFOs. For me, as a faithful Catholic, I think we have to take the other direction. Is that these other things can exist, but they were identified. In most cases, this is the guardian angel. This is the throne of God. This is seraphim. This is cherubim. So they weren't unidentified. They weren't unidentified for the people who were seeing them, and they wrote about them in Holy Scripture, what they actually were. And if they happen to resemble, it's legitimate, I think, to look at some contemporary phenomena and ask whether they might be the same thing. But the same thing is not that they're UFOs or aliens. The same thing would be that they're angel in some kind of angelic light.
Paul, can you comment like you did at lunch about that passage right there that I've highlighted, which is the symbolism? I think you said when it's angelic cases like this in Scripture, that there's usually symbolism involved with the different culture of the time. In this case, it's the different faces on the sides of the creatures.
Well, give context here, right? This is from the book of this is.
Hopefully Paul can do it. This is Ezekiel's wheels within the wheels vision, but there were 4 living creatures that he's describing, and he's got each creature has different faces on each side of their head. And I think, Paul, you said this was something like the throne of the Byzantines or something. What?
The throne of the Middle Eastern, called the Mesopotamian cultures at the time, that they typically, and I haven't made this up, this is from research of Old Testament scholars, that if the descriptions we have of royal thrones of that period and the cultures all around very closely resemble that. And you would have the creatures on each side kind of hold as if they're holding up the throne and the other kinds of things. And so you have people look at this and say, "Oh, see, this is a UFO," but they don't know the context. It's not unidentified. Ezekiel knew exactly what it was. He's a priest, and he's saying it is like a vision of the glory of the Lord. And so for him, it's symbolic of the vision is showing him, revealing to him in a way that he would appreciate that God is the king ruling over all. You don't go back and look at, so see, that's really the wheel within the wheel, so that's really a UFO. It's the other way around. Maybe things today, if they are the same, might actually be angels that people are seeing, could be demonic things. But the one thing I won't do is go back, as some people have tried to do, and say, "Oh, Fatima, see the orb moving around, stuff like that was really a UFO. It wasn't Mary."
Right.
No. We need to look at it through the Catholic lens. And
that passage says, "As for the likeness of their faces, each had the face of a man in front. The 4 had the face of a lion on the right side. The 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, and the 4 had the face of an eagle on the back. Such were their faces."
And each of those faces, has symbolic meaning. In fact, the early Christians saw in this because the 4 faces get mentioned again in the book of Revelation, and saw them as a foreshadowing of the 4 Gospels.
Yeah.
And
each of the evangelists have
a symbol that matches this. So the kind of tradition that became the primary tradition was that if you looked at the beginning of each gospel, there's each face kind of fits that. So Matthew is face of a man because it starts with Jesus' human genealogy, and John is the eagle because he soars. His first chapter soars up into the heavenlies, talking about things.
It does.
Mark starts out with the voice roaring in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord," like a lion in the wilderness.
Oh.
And then Luke starts out in the temple, and the oxen were part of the sacrifice. And so the face of an ox or a cow in some cases.
That's pretty cool.
That each of them had that. So I'm just saying
every
that's the
single
tradition.
Ancient Alien episode talks about Elijah's fiery chariot, and you have artwork that shows little creatures floating around the sky. Say, oh look, there's UFOs, right? So you explain that. How the artwork had those little creatures floating around.
Oh, that part, yeah. So again, I'm no art historian, but I know how to do research, right? And there are historians who look at that and say, yeah, that's crazy. It's typically what they'll have is often it's a picture of the crucifixion, and up in the sky on one side there's a little human face, a little human figure in what's the sun, and one that's in the moon. But if you look at it, you could try to conjecture that these are some kind of alien astronauts, moving through the sky. But if you know anything about art history and what I learned about art history, there they are. Okay, is that it was what would you call it, an artistic trope of the time.
He's in a UFO, man. He's in a flying.
right.
He's in the Tic Tac. That's the pilot at the USS Nimitz flying around that we got on camera.
Right, yeah. The artistic trope is, and you get it in lots of
and so
east
there
and
they
west.
are up there.
Yeah, up there.
These
and
are
these are the
these
details.
are the blown up versions
details.
of the things at the top, left and right.
Yeah.
And for the people who are listening, we're looking at this ancient artwork that looks like little people are sitting inside little aircraft, and it's all over ancient artwork. So that's what we're looking at.
Yeah. So the trope is this, that these are personifications of the sun and the moon. And when people say, what's that? Okay, the best thing I can imagine is okay, say centuries from now, if the world lasts that long, and people are doing research into our own time, and they look at the emojis we have on our cell phones, and they say, look, it's a sun with a human face in it. Look, it's a moon with a human face in it. These are alien astronauts or something. Right. No, they're personifications of the sun and moon. Every little kid can tell you that. They'll draw pictures of the sun with a smiley face on it.
Right.
That we personify those things. And that's what it was for the artists. They did it again and again.
Yeah.
So that particular trope, you can say, no,
as
really,
soon as you say
not,
sun and moon, you see it.
Exactly. Yeah. Sun there, crescent of the moon.
Yeah.
And then the other kinds of paintings, like there's one where there's a ring of light in the sky, and then the Holy Spirit dove is coming down from it. I think it's Jesus' baptism, maybe. And they'll say, see, it's a disc. Guys, the circle is an ancient symbol of God. It has no beginning and no end. And so it reflects God's eternity.
Infinity.
It's been used for forever. And so no, that's a symbol of God the Father, and the Holy Spirit's coming down on God the Son. It's a painting about the Trinity. But if you don't have any background in that, it's easy to fall for these stories. Oh, that's really a flying saucer that's there. And the problem is most of the shows that will talk about that, on TV, they never think for some reason to actually ask an art historian, what can you tell us about this?
Well, they don't want to know the truth. They don't want to know.
Probably not. I explained it one time to an interviewer, and he just brushed right over it. But so anyway, I just think that's important for folks to know. If they're alien, there's the one I'm thinking about. See, all right, there's the circle of light.
Right,
it's coming down on Jesus here, and it's hard to make out, but the Holy Spirit dove is right under the circle there. That's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's what it is.
Yeah. All right, Kevin, be thinking if you have any last minute questions, but I'll kind of give you that lead.
I would to go back to the extraterrestrial thing just real quick.
Yeah, sure.
So, and we talked about Thomas Kuhn and the revolutions. I think that we're on the edge of another scientific revolution where we think we have thought we knew all about things can't go faster than the speed of light, that kind of thing. And I have, Christian scientist friends who say to me, I'm fine with ETI being out there somewhere, but I just don't think it can be here because, it's too far a distance for them to travel. And what they're doing is saying, well, first of all, that they're ignoring all kinds of kind of cutting edge science that talks about ways that you could actually get around this principle of not going faster than the speed of light. That we can't, you'd be like Augustine, because he didn't know the technology of sailing across the ocean, thinks it's impossible. No, we don't know this is possible. Science has had to correct itself so many times. That's why in my book, I say I'm not even going to deal with all that. I just think it's possible that science has the laws of physics we haven't discovered.
What I know is that, in the 60s, the universe was, due to the Big Bang, it was like 8 billion years old. And now, in the last 60 years, it's like 13.8 billion years old. So It's aged a lot more than we have, a lot more. I mean, it keeps getting older. But every time they have a pronouncement, they act so, well, this is science. They act so damn certain. There's an arrogance, a hubris that runs through the whole scientific community. And they always think, I think this is happening a lot with the whole Egyptology. And like they always are certain of certain things. And we're finding more and more like the whole idea of ancient civilizations where like they had technology that we simply do not have. Our whole technology is based on the internal bustible, and say it, help me out, the internal combustible engine. And yet they were able to build these pyramids with some technology that we just can't comprehend. You know, they have these Egyptian statues that we've all seen. Like if I showed you the face of it, you'd know it. Like you'd recognize these pharaoh-looking faces cut right out of the stone. And Paul, they're perfectly symmetrical, right? So the distance between the ear and the nose, or the length of the eye, it's a complete clone from left side to right side. It's just, and to the point where the scientists now look at this and say, it's within like a thousandth of an inch or something. And you have to have something like laser technology to have done this. They're using hammer and chisel, and they can't do it because the precision is finer than the finest chisel you can have. So we look at that and we say, wait a minute. I mean, they clearly had some kind of technology that we just don't understand. And that's easy for me to accept. Easy. Why do we think we're so good? We can't even, you know, we gave like 6 billion years to the universe in the last 60 years. I mean, it was just crazy. So, you know, to say that you can't go faster than the speed of light, or to say that time travel is impossible, or, you know, different things like this, I just say, well, how do you know? How do you know?
Yeah. And again, historically, science has had to self-correct a lot of times. So it could be that way. But again, about the ultra-terrestrial thing, I just want to say this, that one of the patterns that we've observed, going back to the beginning of the nuclear age, is that they show up around any site that has to do with nuclear stuff. So, so not just nuclear missiles, missile sites, nuclear power plants, down the coast of Georgia, where the nuclear substation is on the coast of Georgia, at the Savannah River nuclear power plant in Augusta, at just anything that has to do, research places like Oak Ridge, again and again and again. And they seem really interested in that. So hard to imagine why, but perhaps one reason that would lean toward the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis for some of this stuff is that why would they care about what we can do with nuclear power? Because if we blow up the planet, we've blown up their home too. That they share the planet with us, and they don't want us ruining it all. Now it's just a thought, it's a common speculation. But that, and then also if you're worried about traveling faster than light, okay, well, what if they're already here? So that's not even an issue anymore if they are ultra-terrestrial. But for me, the other thing that would lean toward the direction of at least some of these things being like that is that it's in cultures all over the world that they've been here long. They've described, they can have different variations. But C.S. Lewis, writing about this, the great almost Catholic author, is very close Christian, close to being Catholic in his thinking. He specialized in medieval literature, maybe Renaissance too, but he writes about the fairy folk tradition and how, he insists, and I'm inclined to follow him because he really knew his stuff, that the whole notion of fairy folk in Western culture, even though it was kind of an alternate in some ways, that it wasn't really, that most of the Christian population accepted it as real, and that it didn't become associated with demonic stuff until after the Protestant Reformation and the Calvinist influence began to say, no, it's all demonic, it's all demonic, it's all demonic.
Really? Wow.
So if that's true, I mean, that's, and again, he knows his stuff. If that's true, then maybe the whole thing about fairy folk we should look at a little closer. And then the whole poltergeist phenomenon. I mean, there's so many things that could be explained by that, perhaps. I want to be the guy that doesn't just rule out something automatically unless the faith right away says that, don't try to contact the dead. other things like that. If it says it really clearly, fine. But if the church has left things open for discussion, then let's talk about it.
I asked this last time we talked, if irrefutable evidence appeared tomorrow and Donald Trump rolls out this flying saucer onto the front lawn and he takes out a couple green aliens and says, this is going to be huge. Take a look at this. I'm going to, I want my face on Mount Rushmore.
I've known this for a long time.
I want you to name Mars after me. And so here I'm going to reveal everything. And it's, if that happened, first of all, the people that say it's all demons, they're all just going to find some reason to say this is all BS. We don't believe it. It's fake. It's a hoax, or it's demons.
Psyops, or it is demons, right?
The question though is, do people just stop going to mass the next day? Do Catholics just say, well, Catholic faith is totally bunk, Christianity's bunk, Jesus isn't God, I'm out of here?
For over 200 years, the adversaries of the Christian faith, and especially the Catholic faith, have tried to claim that's the case. So, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Right.
So, for instance, Thomas Paine, who's the pamphleteer and writer who
Common Sense,
British, right? Supporting the American Revolution, very influential in his day. He's an atheist, and he wrote extensively about extraterrestrial intelligence, that he believed it was real, and said, and therefore it disproves the Christian faith. Yeah. And you've had people try to do that, for a long time, that if this is real, it disproves the Christian faith. I even heard a prominent Catholic theologian or saw him write that recently, and I thought, oh my goodness, don't say that. Don't say, because it's not true. Number one. And number two, you're setting people up to leave the church once this is revealed, if it is disclosed. So,
I heard a priest make a joke one time, and I thought it was very funny, because he's living a celibate life, and he says, man, if they find the body, meaning Jesus's body, he says, if they find the body, I'm out of here. It's like, well, that would prove a problem for the Christian faith,
right, that kind of thing. That's the main thing.
If this was a hoax,
right. Yeah,
we have a problem there. But finding little green Martians, that's not a problem. Sorry.
So so some folks would have to try to find some way to explain away. But I think you would have some people misled by that claim. And in fact, by the claim of people like this theologian I'm talking about and others that it is contrary to the Catholic faith. If they get irrefutable scientific evidence that's there, then some are going to say, okay, I'm not going back to mass. It's all wrong. That's why I wrote my book. The main reason I wrote my book, that they have a reason.
That's why
they can read
published
this book.
We published that book.
And read that and say, no, that doesn't contradict my faith.
Yeah.
My faith has room for that. It has for 2,000 years. So you'll have those. But interestingly enough, there will be people who come knocking on the church's door. And they already are. I know several personally. I know others who are, I believe, on their way. They have bought into the scientific materialism, this notion that there's only matter and energy, there's no soul, there's no spirit, no God, no devil, no demons, no angels, no life after death, that if science can't figure it out, that it doesn't exist, or it's not real. And they bought into that. Some people call it scientism, where you put all your trust in science, and science goes beyond what it can reasonably declare to be true. And this stuff has knocked them has shattered that tiny little worldview. There are things that science can't explain, can't even handle, and things that they seem maybe spiritual, they're almost transcendent. But there are people, some of whom, the names you would recognize, who have said, I had left my faith. A lot of them raised Catholic. I'd left my faith, bought into that particular view of science, and now all of this has made me reconsider. And it's as if I'm making a spiritual return of some kind. Some of the people I'm in touch with, I'm in touch with a group of pastors that are kind of thinking about these things and how do we prepare. They're all saying the same thing. They're meeting people that they have this encounter and it brings them to God, or at least is the first step toward it.
Well, to me, it always shows just some kind of just incredible, more glorious power that he's displaying. I mean, that's why I watch Planet Earth with the kids on TV, right? You just see the glory of nature. Yeah. All these animals I didn't even know existed. Yeah. They're doing all these incredible things out there. And I love watching those beautiful images and the beautiful pictures. And I don't have any problem limiting that or letting that go beyond our small, little, tiny, itty-bitty blue world.
I love a quote from St. Augustine. I say it often. There are people who have an argument that we would lose our special status with God if there were other creatures out there made in the image of God. And somehow he would love us less, or we wouldn't be special anymore. And I said, okay, the experience of every parent of more than one child, you and I both, shows how that's wrong. Your first child comes along and you say, oh, I love this child so much. I can't never love another child like this one. Yeah. And then the second one comes along, oh, I love this child so much. I could never love. And you realize that when you have more than one, your love isn't divided, it's multiplied. And the love of God, however much more so, of our Heavenly Father, the fact that he would have multiple intelligent races to love and to care for, that wouldn't reduce. Each one of us would still be special. That's how it is with a father, And so it just doesn't make any sense to me. That it's almost like a firstborn who finds out there's going to be a second kid coming along. It's like, no, I want to be the only one.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's almost at that level that people are arguing that emotionally somehow would make us somehow less in God's eyes. But no.
All right, Paul. What do you expect to see this year with regard to UAP developments?
Well, to quote Amos, I'm not a prophet or the son of a prophet, but I'll prophesy. No, I will prophesy. I think just from the people that I know personally, kind of behind the scenes, working with Congress in particular, but also scientists and some others, I think we're going to know an awful lot more by the end of the year. I'm not going to go so far as to say that there'll be some kind of public disclosure or confirmation of the existence of non-human intelligence. Certainly not by the government, but though it could happen. I mean, with President Trump, he's not beholden to a lot of people. But who knows? He could just spill.
Yeah, but he told us he was going to release everything with JFK, and something at the last minute made him pull back the reins. So it made me think, oh man, maybe he's a little bit cautious on that. I mean, maybe there's a good reason.
That's the thing. I mean, if he were not to follow through, my guess would be because someone in the government would convince him that national security somehow forbids that. And he would feel a patriotic responsibility. I can't do this because it's not for the good of the country. I can see that happening. But I hope, he's got several people he's surrounding himself with who are demanding transparency on this issue. Rubio, starting with Rubio, but others as well. And so I think that we've got the best chance we've had in a long time for the government to come clean on some stuff. But even if that doesn't happen, the thing is, within the scientific community, you've got people like Avi Loeb at Harvard, former chair of the astronomy department there, who's setting up scientific equipment in various places in the Galileo project. As he says, the skies are not classified. The heavens are not classified. So we'll look for our own stuff. We don't have, shouldn't be depending on the government to tell us everything. And you've got other people, Rob Mitchell with a project that would involve FM radios, broadcasts and stuff. I don't understand all the science. But you've got the scientific community looking at things and just saying, okay, let's put that stigma aside, and we can talk about the historical reasons for the stigma. It's part of the government's attempt to cover up. But so much that could happen. There are more whistleblowers coming forward now. There's talk of others. A lot will depend on how much protection they actually get, legal protection they actually get. Because for some of them, their lives have been threatened. Their families' lives have been threatened. And so we'll see. But I'm very hopeful that by the end of the year, we'll know a lot more than we do now.
What does the Catholic Church need to do to prepare for these sorts of disclosures?
Well, I wrote a paper. I mentioned the Soul Foundation before. They have a series of what they call white papers that are basically policy papers. There's one in economics. There's one for government research. There's one for, I think, for science, different fields. And they asked me to write one that I would address to the Catholic community in particular. I
went through it. This bad boy.
That one, yeah.
It's serious work. It's
it
really
needed to be
a brilliant articulation of this, but then some really concrete examples of things that the church could do at a local level to deal with this issue.
Local and all the way up. I mean, the Vatican needs to take sometimes the church is playing catch up, about things, and I just think it shouldn't be.
I heard a comedian once say, if the Catholic Church, if the Vatican is apologizing for what they did in the Middle Ages now, well, imagine what file they're on. They're working through the file cabinets, and they're at Galileo. There we go.
Right. Well, and what kind of files they have? That's another question too. But anyway, I suspect there are people at the Vatican who are very open to this. There's some groups trying to make contact with, find out who the people might be open, just so they can present the case that, you know, it's theologically important. There's a huge pastoral difference. I know priests who are telling me that they're having people come to them in confession and saying, I've had this experience. What do I do with it? Does this destroy my faith? I know one priest who his faith was almost destroyed by experiences he had until he read my book, praise God. And it helped him to answer questions and say, no, if this stuff is real, they're God's creatures, we can handle it. And so at the pastoral level, the church really needs to start. If nothing else, I would love to see it in every parish. You know, the pastor be able to say, we understand that people have these kind of experiences. If you do, please come to me to talk. And maybe even set up groups where they could talk with each other. Because they're so stigmatized, if they even mention it, in our culture, that the one place they should be able to come is to the church.
And not be told it's all demons, you need an exorcist.
Yeah. Now, in some
if
cases,
you do, then you do. But the priest needs to be equipped to help assess that. I mean, there's some triage here that they got to do.
Yes. And they know how to do that. I've been involved in cases where I'm helping a priest to kind of sort out whether this really seems to be spiritual or something else. And the something else is usually psychological. But just to say, we need to be doing that. There are people right now who would love to be able to talk to their priest, their pastor about this issue, but they're afraid of how they'll be looked, or they'll be dismissed, or you need to go get professional help or whatever.
So that priest, who we will not name, an influencer who you know, was so certain with you and on social media that it's all demons. Imagine someone in his flock came to him and said, I had this experience. Then if he's internally logical, he has to say, well, then we need to do deliverance prayers on you right now because you're under diabolic assault. That's pretty harsh.
Well, and it's a rash judgment in my belief. You need to be able to discern it, and you need to understand more about what's going on.
Right, as opposed to sitting down and talking and doing a diagnosis, which is what they do. You know, I sat here with Dan Schneider just recently, and he works with Father Rippiger on exorcisms, and there's a whole intake process to figure out, is this an emotional issue, a psychological issue, a spiritual issue, is it oppression, obsession, possession, all these kinds of things. It takes a while to diagnose, but they treat it with respect and they go through it. And so if somebody says, I had this experience that I can't make sense of, to just throw them under the bus and saying, well, that was a demon, and I just don't think that's fair. I don't think it's very pastoral at all. But the church has to begin training people to be able to communicate about this, because they don't understand this stuff at all. They're not equipped to do this right now.
Well, I've got priest friends who are sharing the book with other priest friends and saying you need to begin to address this. But there needs to be some action from the Vatican, kind of setting the pace that, okay, we need to take this seriously.
Yeah, okay.
Now, who am I to advise the Vatican? But the Soul Foundation asked me to write the paper, so I did.
A pretty well-equipped person to advise the Vatican on a lot of things.
I don't know.
Or everything.
But anyway, they asked me to do it, and I said, okay, this is my chance to actually say,
they need a lot of advising
concretely,
right now.
This is, if I were king, if I were pope, this is what I would do.
Yeah.
And so I kind of addressed the level of the Vatican, the bishops' conferences, the individual bishops, pastors, lay people, Catholic academic institutions, Catholic hospitals, Catholic, there are things that could be done practically in all those areas to help people prepare for these kinds of things.
To wrap up with a little bit more lighthearted question, someone asked Pope Francis if he would baptize an alien. How would you answer that question?
I love this. I told the story of the talk I gave at the Soul Foundation. So I said, okay, well, that's a hypothetical question. And like all hypothetical questions, you need to know what the conditions the details of the hypothesis are, because that makes all the difference in the end. And so I said, how many of you have ever seen the movie Signs?
Yeah.
You know, Mel Gibson. And in that movie, you know, what happens? The aliens are here, they're invading, they're hostile, and they die upon contact with water. So I said, what if we had a real life version of that? And you asked me the question, should you baptize an alien? I would say, right away, by all means, baptize them all.
Right.
They'll die.
Right, they'll die.
That's how
they're gone.
It's the only way we get. It's the only way we win the war.
Right.
So anyway, maybe that's not as funny as I thought it was. But
No, it's good. You baptize them and they're gone.
Yeah,
you know?
baptize them and take care of the problem.
I think somebody else said, well, it depends if they ask. Like, you know, what if they
of
ask
course.
to be baptized?
And then you've got all kinds of, and you know what? It's not any question. Leibniz, who was Lutheran, I think, was talking about, okay, what if they came here and inevitably they would somebody would want to join, and they asked about communion, and what would happen if one of them wanted to be ordained? And he says, I think the Catholic Church would probably have to have another ecumenical council to decide or something. So just to know, I keep encouraging people. These aren't new thoughts. These aren't new thoughts. No. All of this, people have been talking about this for centuries.
And you know what? They're going to keep talking about it. You know?
Yeah, but we may have more information to make, because that's part of it. A lot of the questions that the church needs to answer can't be answered unless and until we actually have open contact where we can say to them, tell me, where I would start is, how did everything come to be? How do you see that? How did everything come to be? To try to get at whether they have a notion of God, for instance.
Yeah.
To try to observe their behavior and see if if there's obvious evidence that they're fallen, or do they not seem to be, Of course, they could just be really good deceivers that way, but because they could be fallen like us and still be able to look good.
Well, you're doing great work, Paul. It's fascinating. Thanks for all your time. I highly encourage people to take a look at this book. It's serious business. It's a great work of scholarship, and it's a great work of faith, because you started this whole thing by saying, if Holy Mother Church comes out and declares something, you will submit. And that's a powerful thing. So I thank you for that, and I will too. So will Tan in any way, So
and it's my challenge to to some folks who take the all demons or that it can't exist. My challenge to them is, okay, if the church came out tomorrow and either said, number one, it's not contrary to faith, or even went further and said they exist, would you be willing to submit to that? And if they say no, then that tells you a lot.